What if the key never leaves her sleeve? What if the quiet footsteps in the darkened halls of Riverrun simply pass Jaime Lannister by, and the most reckless choice of the war is the choice that is never made at all? The cell is small, more a stone throat than a room, swallowing sound and breath alike. Torchlight seeps through the bars in a wavering band, Gold struggling against the familiar darkness, throwing his chained hands into long, distorted shadow on the damp wall. Water drips somewhere just out of sight, a slow, patient rhythm that has become the measure of his nights, the way a man at court once measured time by music and feasts. Here, the world is narrowed to iron, stone, and the soft hiss of his own breathing. In another telling of this same midnight, there is the faint scrape of a key, the rustle of a woman's cloak, the tremor in a voice that has already counted the cost and decided to pay it. In that story, Catelyn Stark stands at his door and gambles her honour, her son's trust, and the shape of the war on a mother's desperate understanding of what it means to lose a child. But this is not that story. In this version, she does not come. What if she never rises from her chair, never wraps her fingers around cold iron, never walks the corridor between her son's banners and her enemy's chains? What if the single decision that seemed so small to the lords who would later judge her, a woman and her grief, a moment of softness in a hard winter of war, never happens, and the key remains only a weight against her wrist? Jaime waits all the same. He sits with his back to the wall, the way a man sits when he refuses to show his fatigue, even to stones. He thinks of Cersei's hair in the firelight of the throne room, of the way important words used to fall from his father's mouth like verdicts. Heir, duty, legacy. Tywin Lannister does not beg. He does not plead for hostages. He moves pieces. He speaks of victory as if it were inevitable, the natural order of things. So Jaime tells himself that somewhere above him, beyond these walls, his father is already reaching for the board, already turning this insult into leverage. The north holds his body, but the west still holds the gold, the armies, the quiet, ruthless patience that built a dynasty out of rock. He waits for the sound of boots in the corridor, for the flare of a torch, for the soft intake of breath when a woman steels herself to do something unforgivable. It does not come. The water keeps dripping. The torch outside gutters, then steadies, its small fire fighting the damp air. Jaime shifts his wrists against the manacles and feels, for the first time in many long nights, not anger, not even boredom, but the thin edge of doubt. What if no one is coming tonight? What if his chains remain, and with them a weight upon Tywin's plans, upon Robb Stark's choices, upon the hidden feast being prepared in a different river castle far to the west? Somewhere above, Catelyn Stark sits with her grief and does not move. The key does not scrape. The lock does not turn. And if the most dangerous choice in the war is the one she refuses to make, does the realm sleep more safely in its beds?
Or has the true disaster only just begun to take shape, quiet as footsteps that never arrive? So we go back, not to the cell, not to the clink of iron and the sharp, sour smell of fear, but to the chamber above it.
Earlier that same evening, when the choice is still only a shadow in the room, and not yet an act that will set the river on a different course. Riverrun at night is not silent. The river itself never is. The trident moves below the walls with a low, ceaseless murmur, the way a man might mutter in his sleep when the day has been too heavy to bear. Beyond the shuttered windows, the war camp settles. A distant laugh, quickly hushed, the soft thud of boots on packed earth, the last crackle of cooking fires dying down into embers. The river wind slips through a gap in the shutters, cool and smelling faintly of wet stone and wood smoke, and it finds Catelyn Stark where she sits, alone, with her hands wrapped around nothing. In the canon we remember that room is already half a cell. News has come like blows. Bran and Rickon burned at Winterfell. Winterfell itself, her father's promised refuge for her grandchildren, taken and blackened. Sansa held in King's Landing, a bargaining chip in a game she cannot see. Arya gone to ground, or gone to darkness, with no word to say which. A mother counts her children the way important words are counted in a prayer. And Catelyn's tally comes up short, again and again, until something in her breaks in a way that feels like clarity. In that telling, she goes to Jaime Lannister with a key in her hand and a wild hope in her chest. She does not think of herself as a traitor to Robb so much as a mother paying the only price left to her. If the Kingslayer can be exchanged for Sansa and Arya, if one man's freedom can buy back even the possibility of her daughters' lives, then the cost feels terrible, but comprehensible. It is a choice made in the dark by a woman who believes all the other doors have already been closed. But here, something small moves first. What if the raven from the north does not bring the charred bodies at Winterfell, only the report of its fall and the uncertainty that follows? What if Edmure, awkward and earnest, comes to her door with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, and says quietly that Robb needs her still, that the River Lords watch her face for permission to hope? What if Robb himself, earlier that night, comes not as a king giving orders, but as a son who lets his voice crack when he speaks of the men he has lost? In this timeline, the words land differently. Catelyn hears her eldest child speak of duty and of the north that looks to him. And she understands, with a new and painful clarity, that she is not only mother to 5 scattered children. She is, whether she wishes it or not, Lady of Winterfell in exile, mother of the north itself. To free Jaime now would not simply be disobedience. It would be choosing one kind of fire over another, the blaze of a mother who will burn the world for her own, or the colder, slower burn of a woman who stays her hand and lets the war take its course. She sits with the key on the table. She does not move. The way a man might feel his life narrow to a single breath, she feels her world narrow to this stillness. History so often remembers the doors that open, the swords that are drawn, the bargains struck in whispered rooms. It speaks of boldness, of decisive acts. Yet the true hinge here is quieter. The key never leaves the table, the door never opens, and from this almost act, this refusal, a different war will uncoil. Down below, Jaime Lannister sleeps in chains he believes will soon be struck off. Above, Catelyn Stark lets the night pass, and when the first grey of dawn touches the river, her choice has already remade the board, though no one yet understands the cost. The cell remains locked. The Kingslayer stays in the dark. And somewhere on the road that will not be ridden, a woman named Brienne waits for a command she will never receive. Sauch. Morning comes thin and grey over River Run, and Catelyn Stark does not move. She sits where she has sat all night in a quiet room that smells of river damp and cooling candle wax, her hands resting lightly on the folded key before her, the small strip of iron that might unmake a war. Outside, she can hear the Tully banners snapping in the faint breeze, the distant clatter of men-at-arms changing watch, the low murmur of voices that would name her traitor if they knew how far her thoughts have already walked. She does not take the key. The metal is cold, even through the linen of the cloth, a narrow, ordinary thing, yet she feels it as a weight, the way a man feels the heft of a sword he may not have strength to swing. In another telling of this same dark night, her fingers would already have closed around it, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, knowing it might shatter everything. In that story, grief becomes motion. Here, it becomes a stone in her chest. She makes a slow, merciless inventory. Ned's head on the spike she has never seen but cannot stop envisioning. Bran and Rickon lost to winter and fire in her mind, small bodies she was not there to guard. Sansa and Arya taken, their names turned into messages and leverage, the way important words become coin in King's Landing. Once the thought of them in Lannister hands had burned so hot it drove her to break oaths. Tonight, the fire has banked to coals, and what remains is harder, colder, edged with understanding of cost. She almost rises. Her knees shift, her skirts whisper. She almost reaches for her cloak, sees herself calling for a guard, walking the stone corridors toward the cell where the Kingslayer waits in darkness. Instead, her palms spread flat on the table, fingers splayed as if she could pin herself to the wood and keep her body from betraying her. The candle gutters, wax pools, time thins. What if she frees him and Robb's face closes to her forever? What if the Northern Lords look at her the way a man looks at a collapsed bridge, with anger and a quiet, practical contempt? She imagines Karstark's rage, the Frey's wounded pride, the River Lord's uneasy whispers. She imagines Tywin Lannister speaking of terms and then breaking them, her daughters' throats cut in some red-lit room, while Jaime rides free beneath a lion banner. She has seen how quickly a war can slip its leash. She understands now that one woman's midnight choice might start a river of blood she cannot hope to dam. So she chooses not to choose. The key remains folded in its cloth, untouched. The candle burns low, haloing the iron in a small trembling circle of light while the rest of the room sinks towards shadow. Catelyn bows her head and whispers a prayer, not for courage to act, but for the strength to endure this stillness, this terrible waiting, while her children remain in enemy hands and the shape of the coming betrayal begins, unseen, to form elsewhere. What if, while Catelyn Stark prays in that quiet room above, the man who is the centre of every unspoken bargain simply lies awake in the dark and begins, for the first time, to doubt his own story? The cell is small, but the night inside it feels larger than the river beyond the walls. Jaime Lannister lies on sour straw that pricks the back of his neck, the itch of his overgrown beard a constant low insult. The air is thick with the stink of damp stone, old piss, cold iron. When the torch in the corridor gutters, the darkness presses closer, the way a man might lean in to hear a dangerous word more clearly. He replays the day in fragments. The guard who called him Kingslayer, with that particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, as if the name itself might cut him. The questions, always the same, about scouts, about numbers, about his father's plans. He does not answer. He has learned the way important words can travel farther than any raven, how a single admission might cost more than a battle lost. Underneath the practiced arrogance, another thought moves, unwelcome. He is Tywin Lannister's heir, the Golden Son, the sword hand of Casterly Rock. Men like that are not left to rot in Riverlord dungeons. It is an article of faith he has never had to name. And yet, as the straw rustles and no one comes, he finds himself wondering whether the war outside has grown too large for one man in chains to matter. What if his father has other fires to put out? What if the choice has already been made, somewhere in a bright hall far from this room, to spend Jaime's life as one more piece in the cost of victory? He thinks of Catelyn Stark's visits, the way her hatred filled the cell more completely than any torchlight. Her questions about the boy he pushed from the tower, the winter quiet in her eyes when she spoke of Bran's fall. In another telling, he might have seen in her grief an opening, a path to movement, to bargain, to air that did not smell of rust and mildew. Here she has not come again. The silence where her anger should be leaves only restless speculation. He imagines rescue as a man might imagine summer during a hard winter. Lannister riders slipping through the night, steel at the throats of sleepy Tully guards. A raven from King's Landing, Cersei's words sharpened into royal command. A careful exchange, Sansa for Jaime, hostages crossing a river under truce banners. Each vision arrives bright and certain, then dims as the hours stretch and the corridor remains empty. He counts the stones to steady himself. One wall, then the next, fingertips tracing rough edges in the dark. 47, 53, 57. He starts again. On the third pass, the numbers refuse to match, slipping like water through his grasp. A thin thread of panic pulls tight in his chest at the thought that he might grow old here, miscounting the same walls, his name fading into shadow while the world above rearranges itself without him. And somewhere beyond the stone, decisions are already being made that will test exactly how long a lion can remain in chains before something in him breaks. Above that breaking line, the war room at Riverrun is very quiet. Candle flames lean and straighten in the faint draught from the arrow slits, throwing long, nervous shadows across the maps. Robb stands over the table with his hands braced on either side of the riverlands. The carved direwolf of House Stark planted firmly atop the painted crossroads. Beneath its wooden paws, pinned almost as an afterthought, lies a smaller lion. Jaime Lannister reduced to a token, a bright thing held down under northern weight. He does not move it often. When he does, it is with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, not because he fears it will break, but because he understands how much of his hard-won authority now rests upon that single piece. Tywin's heir in chains, the Kingslayer, sleeping behind stout stone instead of riding free beneath Lannister banners. The room smells of tallow, ink, and damp wool. Somewhere beyond the walls, a dog barks once and is still. Robb listens. Not to the dog, but to the memory of his mother's voice. The way important words seemed to grow heavier when Catelyn spoke of cost and choice, and the thin line between grief and folly. There had been a season when he woke in the darkness certain that she would do something desperate, that her love for her daughters would drive her past his orders. In this winter-smelling chamber, that fear has eased. She sits not far from him now, her chair drawn back from the table, hands folded to keep from reaching toward the lion. Her face carries the same grief, the same shadowed understanding of what has been taken from them. But no fresh betrayal clings to her. She has not opened the cell door. She has not gambled their one golden hostage on a promise from the south. He speaks of her counsel when the lords are gone, in the late hours when maps blur and numbers lose meaning. The Blackfish, Great Yon, Karstark, they respect a king who holds Tywin's son. They speak more boldly because the lion is here, because every raven they send north and west can truthfully carry that word. Robb Stark has the Kingslayer, and while he has him, the Lannisters must measure every move. What is a raid on the western shore compared to that? What is a burned village, when Tywin's blood sits in a tower above the river, eating plain food under guard? Yet the table is not free of threat. Near the twins, a small wooden bridge marker lies slightly askew, as if even in miniature Walder Frey has taken offence and turned his back. The broken betrothal hangs over every council, an insult that would have shattered a weaker king's position. Robb feels the weight of it, the way a man feels a half-healed wound in the rain, but he has victories to set beside it. Whispering Wood, Oxcross. And more than that, he has this lion, a priceless hostage to offset a faithless bridge. Alone, when the candles burn low and his mother has gone to her chamber, Robb rests his fingers lightly on the direwolf's back. He does not look at the lion as a man, not tonight. He looks at it as Tywin must, as Cersei must, as a shadow over every Lannister feast. Sansa in King's Landing, Arya lost somewhere between rumour and prayer. Their names move through his thoughts like a litany. What if there is a way to bring them home without loosing this piece? What if the single decision that seemed so small, a key turned, a chain unfastened, is the very thing that keeps winter's worst from the north? Over the rivers and roads inked beneath his hands, Robb Stark makes a quiet vow. He will not trade Jaime Lannister lightly. He will not squander this fire he holds in iron. Somewhere on these lines of ink and parchment, there must be a path that leads his sisters back while the lion remains caged. A path where Tywin Lannister feels the cost of every move before he dares to make it. He bends closer to the map, as if he might find it in the darkness between two drawn roads, and does not yet see how many other eyes are watching the same board, searching for their own moment to strike. Far above those ink-stained maps in Riverrun, another room holds its own kind of darkness. The Tower of the Hand is quiet at this hour, the city's noise pressed thin against stone. Only the fire moves. It throws a low, uncertain light over Tywin Lannister's desk, over the neat stacks of parchment, over the single report he has read 3 times and still leaves face down, as if the words might change if he refuses to look too long. Jaime, named there in a scribe's careful hand, followed always by the same chain of titles and the same humiliation: captive, hostage, leverage. He sits very straight, the way a man does when his own body is the last thing he will allow to betray him. His armour is gone, his cloak folded away, but the discipline remains in the set of his shoulders, in the way his fingers rest beside the wax seal instead of crushing it. He does not pace, he does not drink, he reads, and in the stillness between lines his mind divides itself with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. On one side, the cold strategist. That man weighs Jaime as a piece on the board, a bright golden hostage that both protects and endangers him. While the young wolf holds the Kingslayer, any bold stroke in the Riverlands carries a hidden cost. What if a single rash victory on open ground becomes the signal for a northern sword to slip between Jaime's ribs? What if triumph on the field means his line ends in a muddy cell, unseen and unmourned? On the other side, buried under years of iron self-command, sits the father. He does not name that man, even in thought. He simply feels in some deep, unwelcome place the thinness of his legacy. One son in chains. One son who speaks of lions but wears another face. A daughter whose power lies in a bed he cannot fully control. The way important words like heir and house and future have begun to sound less like certainties and more like questions. So the political math shifts. Each raven from the Riverlands is no longer only numbers of dead and miles of burned farms. Each is a veiled reminder that his own blood is part of the tally. He cannot order an annihilating charge without imagining Robb Stark's quiet reply: a head sent south in a box. If he cannot win Jaime back with banners, then the war must be won with ink and daggers instead. Alliances that close around the Starks like a trap. Betrayals whispered in cold halls. Weddings where the music hides the sound of something breaking. He turns, for the first time in earnest, toward the sort of victory that leaves few swords drawn, but many throats cut. And yet, even here, he holds. The final stroke, the true ending he intends for the wolves, is delayed, suspended over the map like a shadow that has not yet found its shape. Until he can be sure of Jaime's fate, he will not spend his last, most terrible answer. Some other answer will have to come first. In the quiet, with the fire burning low, he begins to write it. He does not know that far from this room, another quill is already moving toward the same conclusion by a different road. What if, while Robb bends over his map in Riverrun, the other quill moves not in the Riverlands at all, but high above the Blackwater in a castle that feels more like a gilded cage than a home? In the Red Keep, Sansa stands at a window that does not open as far as she wishes it would. Below, the courtyard lies in its ordered geometry of stone and shadow. Guards pacing their lines, servants crossing and recrossing the same worn paths. Beyond the walls, the city sprawls, restless and loud, bells marking the hour, the faint salt of the distant sea riding the air, a promise of a wider world that never quite reaches her skin. The room behind her is quiet. The lock on her door is not. In the tale, she once told herself, there was always a trade waiting somewhere ahead. A neat, almost chivalric balance. A sister for a brother. A daughter for a son. In canon, the way important words pass between lords in smoky rooms begins to bend toward that idea. Jaime for Sansa. Jaime for Arya. Some clean exchange that might carry her north again, if she only endures long enough and does not anger the wrong person. Here, that line is thinner, more fragile. Jaime remains in a Stark dungeon, the greatest Lannister cost already paid and still accruing interest with every passing day. Why should Robb surrender that for her? She turns the question over the way a man might turn a blade in his hand, testing its weight, knowing it can cut both ways. She has never seen Jaime Lannister, only heard his name in the same breath as kings and oaths and broken promises. The Kingslayer, her captor's golden son. She imagines him in chains, imagines stone and winter cold around him, and cannot help the bitter understanding that this unseen man is worth more than she is. He is a war's hinge. She is a reminder of a dead man on a spike. He does not know her. Her brother cannot afford to forget him. The Lannisters feel it too. With Jaime still lost to them, Sansa becomes at once more precious and more perilous. Cersei's hand on her shoulder is tighter. Joffrey's gaze lingers with that particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table only so he can decide when to break it. She is paraded when it suits them, hidden when it does not, her walks in the garden shortened, her ladies chosen more for loyalty than for kindness. Every courtesy carries a shadow. Every word spoken to her seems to measure how much fear a girl can hold without shattering. One afternoon, pausing in a gallery where the light falls in long dusty beams, she hears voices ahead, and stillness takes her before she can decide whether to walk away. She does not hear everything. She hears enough. Cersei's low, controlled anger, Littlefinger's softer amusement as he speaks of the boy king's uncle rotting in a dungeon, and the need to husband what leverage remains. The way important words like leverage and uncle twist around her name without quite touching it. Cold moves through her, slow and deliberate. Her fate, she understands, is bound to a man she has never seen, a man in chains far to the north, and whatever choice is made about him, some answering choice will be made about her. Far from the stone walls where her name is weighed like coin, the riverlands burn. Smoke hangs low over the road, a grey ceiling that turns the world small. Arya moves beneath it with her thin bundle and her borrowed name. One more child in a ragged line of refugees. The war-torn fields on either side cut and trampled until they look as lost as she feels. The grass is blackened, the trees split by fire, and every village they pass wears the same expression. Doors torn open, rooms emptied, the quiet after a scream. She answers to Ari when she must. She keeps her head down. He does not think of herself as a piece on any lord's board. She is only a girl with a sword too small to matter and a list of names she whispers into the darkness like a prayer. Somewhere to the north there is Riverrun, she knows. And somewhere beyond that, Robb and Mother and Winterfell that feels more like a story each day the road stretches on. In the halls of power, men speak of her as if they know. Tywin sits beneath the lion banners and accepts reports that both Stark girls are safely penned. Sansa in the shadow of the Iron Throne. Arya a presumed captive, an invisible weight on the scales whenever he thinks of terms and hostages and the proper cost of northern defiance. In Robb's War Council, the understanding is simpler and crueler. Sansa is in King's Landing. Arya is gone. What happens when a man plans a bargain around a ghost? What if the single decision that seems so small, a name written on a tally of hostages, becomes the hinge upon which every later miscalculation turns? Jaime's chains bite no less deeply for it. His continued captivity in Riverrun's tower changes nothing about the mud under Arya's boots or the hunger in her belly. No rider appears on the road to say she has been counted, that her safe return is the price of a golden lion's freedom. And yet, in every tent where Robb and his lords argue, in every chamber where Tywin considers letters with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, her absence is present, a blank space that distorts the lines around it. There are no negotiations because there is no shared map of who truly exists. Around a different fire, on a different night, Arya hears the rumour. A sellsword with a wine-loose tongue speaks of a great lord taken in battle, a lion in chains at Riverrun, the way a man might boast of storms he has never seen. The words drift across the camp, thin and careless. She hears lion, hears Riverrun, hears something in the murmur about the young wolf's victory, and for a heartbeat the world narrows. She does not understand that this unseen prisoner is the axis of half the choices being weighed in distant rooms. She does not know that his fate will one day be spoken of in the same breath as hers, that men will measure which life is the more valuable, which loss the more tolerable. That night she sits close to the campfire, watching the wood collapse into coals, the orange light licking at her fingers when she turns her hands. She thinks of her mother's face bent over a map, of Robb's voice calling the banners, of Winterfell's great hall and the way important words once filled it with safety instead of fear. Somewhere upriver, a choice not made, a key not turned, a cell not opened, has already begun to redraw the map of who lives and who dies. By this fire, she only feels the cold at her back, and the knowledge that no one is coming to trade for a girl the world has misplaced. Dawn comes to River Run as it always has, without understanding that somewhere else it once arrived like a blow. Mist lifts off the Red Fork in slow, torn veils, clinging to the outer walls before the first light pries it loose. On the ramparts, guards stamp their feet against the river chill. One shift trading places with another, the way a man passes a shield to his comrade and thinks no further on the cost of standing watch. The castle wakes by degrees. A cook's fire gutters and then steadies in the kitchens, sending up a thin column of smoke. Stable boys lead out horses, their breath and the animal's breath mingling in the cold air. Metal rings softly as mail shirts are shrugged on, not in alarm, but as habit. In the yard, a boy laughs at some quiet jest, and no one flinches, because no raven has yet torn the morning open with news of betrayal. On the eastern wall, Catelyn walks alone. She has not truly slept. The night still clings to her in the stiffness of her shoulders and the rawness behind her eyes. It's that particular darkness that comes when a choice has been weighed and set aside, but not resolved. She keeps her hands folded before her, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, as if she does not trust them not to reach for keys that never left their hook. Relief comes to her in thin, uncertain threads. Robb will not look at her today with the stunned hurt of a son whose mother has broken faith. The river lords will not gather in some crowded room to speak of treason in low, furious voices. She has postponed that storm. She knows it. She does not pretend otherwise. Yet every step along the battlements is haunted by the understanding that Sansa still kneels in a strange hall before a cruel boy, that Arya is a name without a body in the world's reckoning, and Jaime Lannister still waits below, a single piece on a board that refuses to give her daughters back. Elsewhere in the castle, Robb hears the morning reports, grain tallies, scout sightings along the fords, whispers of Tywin's movements west of Harrenhal. He listens, tired but clear-eyed, his thoughts turning toward the Freys and the bridge they control, toward lines on a map instead of lines being crossed within his own house. He does not hear the words Jaime and escaped in the same breath. No sword clatters to the floor, no voice breaks on the word mother. Around him, the northern and riverland lords stand easy in their armour. They still see Catelyn as they have always seen her, Tully by river and Stark by winter, a pillar of the old honour that holds their fragile alliance together. They speak of her with respect, with a steadiness that would have cracked if they had woken to empty chains and an open cell. The way important words travel through a camp, loyalty, trust, betrayal, remains, for this morning, unchanged. In the dim corridor beneath the castle, a guard makes his round. His torch throws a wavering circle of fire on stone and iron. He pauses at one door out of habit, glances in at the Kingslayer with bored familiarity, and moves on when he sees the man still there, shackled, awake, watching. The chains lie exactly where they were left. The lock sits quiet in its hasp. Somewhere, in another telling of this same grey morning, a different guard is already shouting, already running, already dragging the whole castle into a new shape around a single absence. Here, the shout never comes. Not yet. The question is how long quiet can hold its ground against the shadow that has merely been delayed. Morning finds them in the great hall, not in council but in the quieter ritual that passes for peace between marches. The rushes are newly laid, the fire low and banked, the long room still half in shadow. Bread, cheese, watered wine. The sort of meal that should have felt like Winterfell, like home carried south in little habits. It does not. Robb sits in his father's chair because there is nowhere else for him to sit. He speaks of weather first, the way a man does when there are other, heavier things pressing behind his teeth. Roads softening, the rivers level, scouts reports from the fords. His words move carefully around the space between them, never quite touching it. Catelyn answers with the courtesies she was bred to. She asks after the Karstarks, after Lord Bolton's latest word, after the temper of the Great John. On the surface, it is the easy back and forth of a lord and his chief advisor, mother and son moving in practiced tandem. Underneath, every exchanged word sounds to her like a test she has already almost failed. She can still feel the key's cold weight in her palm from the night before, the way important words had gathered in her throat and then broken apart in the darkness of Jaime's cell. She had been one choice away from shattering Robb's trust. One heartbeat, one turn of a wrist. She hears that almost in every quiet between them now, like a second conversation only she can follow. Robb does not know, not in any way he could name, yet something in him has stiffened. He watches her the way a man watches a bridge under winter ice, aware of a hairline crack he cannot see, only sense. He does not ask what kept her so long in the lower levels. He does not mention the Kingslayer at all. Instead, he speaks of banners, of supply lines fraying as the war stretches, of ravens from the frays that say little and mean less. He speaks of Tywin's movements, of the need to hold Jaime as a counterweight against whatever new cruelty the Lannisters devise. Each problem is laid out with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, as if strategy might be enough to keep the world from slipping. Catelyn nods where she should, but her thoughts keep circling back to two girls' faces. Sansa, last seen in a crowded yard with a prince who smiled like a knife. Arya, somewhere in the great southern darkness, if she lives at all. What is the worth of full granaries, of clever crossings, of river runs' grey walls, if her daughters remain in enemy hands? What is the cost of refusing the only coin she has to buy them back? Here is the pattern interrupt. In this telling, there is no open quarrel about Jaime, no night of shouted accusations and broken faith. The quiet holds, and because it holds, the fracture runs deeper underground, unseen. A shadow beneath the ice, waiting for the next weight to step upon it. Robb tears a piece of bread, does not eat it. His voice, when it comes, is almost casual. "Mother," he says, eyes on the table, "in the end, what do you think we should do with Sir Jaime?" Catelyn feels the old storm rise and forces it down. "We must keep him," she answers, each word measured, neutral, cool. "For now, until the time is right." She does not say what time she dreams of. He does not ask. The room seems colder for it. What if, while the river runs cold around Riverrun's walls, another river of ink and calculation runs beneath Casterly Rock? What if the single golden sun Tywin trusts to hold a sword is reduced on every page to a line item and a risk? The room he has taken for counsel in the Tower of the Hand is bright by southern standards, yet there is a kind of quiet darkness in it all the same. Candles burn low. The table is a low hill of parchment, each letter opened with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, then weighed, then set aside. The Reach, the Westerlands, the Riverlands. Every seal is another reminder that his best swordsman is not here to end arguments with steel. Cersei stands by the window, restless, the way a man paces before a door he does not wish to open. Tyrion sits, cup-cradled, eyes moving from one letter to the next. He does not drink as much as he pretends to. He listens. Tywin speaks of numbers and grain, of fleets and marches. He speaks of the Tyrell host, fat with victories over Stannis, eager for a marriage, for a crown, for the soft word stability. Once, in another telling of this war, his mind would already be turning, quietly, toward the twins, toward Walder Frey, and the way important words like guest and right can be hollowed out and filled with knives. Here the calculation is different. Jaime's name sits like a stone at the centre of it. Any open treachery against the young wolf might not simply end a northern king, it might end Tywin's heir. What if a single crossbow in a cold yard in Riverrun answers every Lannister slight? What if a raven brings not terms, but Jaime's head? Historically, the Red Wedding grows out of Robb's broken Frey betrothal, out of a war turned to grinding winter stalemate. Now, Tywin must add another column to his ledger, the cost of provoking a mother who still holds his son in chains. He does not fear Catelyn Stark as a general. He fears her as a parent who has already lost too much. Tyrion understands the shape of it before his father names it. Jaime's absence has cut their sword arm and, in some bleak irony, has also bound Tywin's most ruthless impulses. The path to victory narrows, becomes a thin, precarious bridge over darkness rather than the broad, bloody road Tywin prefers. Something in Jon's chest moves, Tyrion thinks wryly, and then corrects himself. That is not his brother's story, nor his. So the pitch to the Tyrells shifts. Less promise of swift, total Stark destruction, more of shared enemies contained, of a realm soothed, of winter kept at bay by careful, measured fire. Margaery for Joffrey, gold for grain, songs instead of screams. For now. When the council breaks, Tywin remains alone. He draws fresh parchment toward him. Not Frey, not yet. Instead, he writes Rose Bolton's name with slow, deliberate strokes, and begins a different sort of letter, one that probes for a quieter betrayal, one that might break the North without forcing Robb Stark to put Jaime Lannister's head on a spike. The ink glistens, dark as a shadow on snow, as he considers how far he can go before a mother's hand tightens on the noose around his son's throat. The ink in Tywin's solar is still drying when the word reaches the twins. The halls there are not quiet. They are never quiet. Smoke from too many torches hangs beneath the rafters, the air damp from the river and thick with the smell of men and meat and old, sour ale. Walder Frey sits in his high-backed chair the way a man sits on a hoard he does not entirely trust, listening as his sons and grandsons murmur the latest tales of the young wolf. Robb Stark crossing at the twins. Robb Stark breaking his sworn word. Robb Stark winning battle after battle, while a Lannister prince rots in a northern room. The insult is a live coal in Walder's chest. That does not change. The broken betrothal, the slight to his house before all the Riverlands, is still the first thing he tastes each morning. Yet as he taps his fingers on the arm of his chair and demands each story twice over, something colder moves beneath the wounded pride. A thin, calculating understanding that the game has shifted. Robb Stark holds Jaime Lannister. The boy who shamed him also holds the one piece Tywin cannot afford to lose. He does not say this aloud at first. He speaks of ingratitude instead, of how the Starks use bridges and forget the hands that built them, of how winter will come and find the Freys remembered only when others need to cross. The way important words are left unsaid in that room is its own kind of language. Behind the grumbling, he is counting costs. Kill the king in the north at his table, and what then? What if the Lannisters decide that a dead son is cheaper than a disobedient bannerman? What if they let Jaime's chains speak for them, and leave the twins between a northern vengeance and a southern indifference? Walder has lived long enough to know that Tywin Lannister's promises are a kind of fire, bright, consuming, and very far away when the darkness finally comes down. He remembers Robert's rebellion, the way a man remembers a winter that almost took his last store of grain. Lords rise and fall. Names burn and are blown to ash. It is the man on the crossing who is trampled first when armies change direction. So when the first careful feelers come from the west, wrapped in courteous phrases and edged with shadow, Walder listens with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He wants recompense, certainly. Greater honours, better marriages, perhaps a royal ward under his roof to soothe the sting to his pride. But he also wants guarantees carved deeper than a lion's word, while that lion's heir sits in a northern cage. In this turning of the tale, he finds himself, almost against his nature, weighing humiliation against annihilation. A wedding that shames a king might be safer than a wedding that drowns a hall in blood. His reply rides out thin as gruel and just as hard to read, full of courtesies and questions, promising nothing. The river mists close around the riders, and for the first time, the shape of the Red Wedding hesitates, as if waiting to see whether the next raven will carry an offer, a threat, or a name no one expects. The river mists thin, and we are carried north and east into colder stone. Rose Bolton's chambers in Harrenhal are a study in controlled darkness, a narrow room, a single candle guttering beside a dish of leeches, the faint smell of old smoke, and something metallic that never quite leaves. He sits alone, the way a man sits who has never trusted a witness. Tywin Lannister's letter opened beneath his pale hand. He reads it twice, then a third time, fingers resting lightly on the parchment, not gripping, not caressing. He does not frown. He does not smile. He lets the words sink in with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, measuring the weight, the cost, the possible uses. Tywin's phrases are polite, edged, probing for weakness, for hunger, for the shape of a northern lord who might be bought if the price and timing are right. Rose's motives, in this quieter winter of the war, have not changed. He resents Robb's impulsive choices, the broken Frey betrothal, the way important words like fealty and guest right have been treated as if they were banners to be shifted with the wind. He sees, with a cold understanding, that the boy he follows may win battles and still lose the war, and that a different Warden of the North might rise from the ashes with Lannister gold at his back, and the Dreadfort's old cruelties given a wider field. In the canon we remember, Tywin's offer gleams because the war feels already decided. Robb's cause is bleeding out, and Jaime Lannister is safely on his way home. But here, in this room, the candle throws a different shadow. Jaime is still a captive of House Stark. The Kingslayer's absence from the south sits between every line of Tywin's letter, like an unspoken threat. If Rose helps slaughter the Starks, while they hold Tywin's heir, what then? Does he become the man who forced a lion to choose between vengeance and his son's life? That is not a stable place to stand. Tywin might reward him, yes, but what happens the first time a decision displeases King's Landing? What if Cersei remembers, in some long, sleepless night, that her brother's chains once clinked in a northern dungeon while Rose counted his new honours? So he lets his mind slide toward another kind of treachery. Slower, quieter. A betrayal that bleeds Robb's strength in the field, that lets supply lines fray and tempers crack, that nudges him away from allies like the Freys without yet plunging a knife at a feast. Perhaps Rose becomes the reasonable voice in the council tent, the man who speaks of terms, of hostages, of the possibility that a careful negotiator might one day deliver Jaime Lannister back to his father, for a price written in titles, lands, and the North itself. The pattern shifts. Not a single night of music and murder, but a long winter of attrition. Is that not, in some ways, crueler? Rose dips his quill at last. His reply forms in thin, elegant strokes, offering cooperation in vague, bloodless terms, full of courtesies and careful silences, but withholding any explicit promise of a wedding turned to slaughter. When the sand dries on the seal, Tywin will have his answer, and no answer at all, left to wonder how far this northern viper can be trusted, and how much more he might want than a single night of red. What if one lantern in one small tent burns alone a little longer, and no one comes to offer the woman inside a different kind of fire to follow? The canvas walls still smell of smoke and green oil. Renly's camp has gone from bright pavilion to hushed encampment, voices lowered, banners drooping in the damp night air, as if colour itself has taken a step back from the world. In the middle of it stands Brienne of Tarth, in a room that is not quite a room, beneath a roof of stained canvas, her sword still streaked with the last red of a king who died without understanding what killed him. She does not move for a long time. The lantern on the table throws her shadow huge and uncertain against the wall, the way a man's guilt can look larger than the deed itself. In canon, This is the moment when Catelyn Stark's quiet, steady voice cuts through the shock, when two outsiders look at one another and recognise something shared in the darkness. Catelyn speaks of mercy, of oaths, of a different service. The way important words can reorder a life in the space of a breath. Here, that word is never offered. Catelyn is already thinking of a captive Kingslayer and the narrow, dangerous path she must not take. She has no reason to linger in this tent, no need to bind this tall, awkward knight to her side, because there will be no secret journey south, no bargain written in defiance of her son. Brienne's grief remains unclaimed, her loyalty unredirected. So the silence stretches. Brienne's thoughts circle the same wound. She failed Renly. She chose him, believed in him with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. And he died in front of her, and her sword could not stop it. What cause is left that is clean? What lord will ask for her service and not laugh, not flinch when she steps into the light? In another telling, she would ride beside Jaime Lannister, trading insults and hard truths, watching, against her will, the way a man can be stripped down to something more complicated than his name. She would be sent after Sansa and Arya, a single mailed hand reaching into the chaos for two girls winter had nearly swallowed. Here, no such command is spoken. No one at Riverrun thinks to tie the fate of the Stark daughters to a woman they have never met. Her choice is narrow to ordinary roads. She can go home to Tarth, to a father who loves her but does not know what to do with the shadowed, armoured shape his daughter has become. She can drift east as a sellsword, another blade for hire in a war that has already shown her its cost. She can seek service with some lord of the Stormlands who remembers Renly kindly and will accept her out of piety or pity. None of them will say Sansa's name. None will speak of Arya. No one will put a map on the table and trace a path through the war-torn riverlands and whisper, "Find them." So we see her last, for now, riding alone beneath a low, sullen sky, rain needling against her cloak, the world around her all mud and muted banners. There is no golden lion in chains at her side, no half-healed promise of redemption, only the steady clop of her horse and the weight of armour that has never felt heavier. Somewhere far away, two Stark girls move through their own corridors of shadow, unguarded by the knight who was meant to cross their path, because one midnight choice at Riverrun quietly cut the thread that would have drawn them together. And in the Lannister war tents, plans are already being drawn on a different board, with Jaime still in chains and no Brienne riding south to change the way he understands the word honour. In King's Landing, the corridor is narrower than she remembers. Sansa moves between stone and shadow, a thin passage lit by torches that spit and crackle, throwing restless light across the red and gold banners. The air smells of smoke and oiled metal. Every footstep sounds too loud. Every guard's gaze lingers a heartbeat too long. She walks the way a man might cross a frozen river in late winter, testing each patch of ice with careful weight, aware that there is darkness beneath and no one waiting with a rope on the bank. In the canon we know, other paths are quietly opening even as these halls close around her. A Kingslayer rides south in chains and along the road begins to feel the cost of every broken oath. A tall woman hears him speak of honour, and something in Jon's chest moves when he later hears her name, because Brienne of Tarth becomes one of those rare people who will take a word like vow and hold it with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Through them, a thin, fragile network forms, a web of people willing to risk themselves for a northern girl they have never met. Here, that web never spins. Jaime stays in his cell at Riverrun. Brienne never rides south. There is no future promise of a blue-cloaked knight crashing into Sansa's story at the last possible moment. No shifting of a Kingsguard conscience that might, one day, turn a key or stay a sword. What if the single decision that seems so small in the black hours at Riverrun has already closed a door Sansa does not even know existed? She feels the absence without understanding its shape. She waits for an honourable Kingsguard who will not come, for some northern champion to appear in the doorway of the throne room, for a tall woman with a sword and a vow to step between her and the boy on the Iron Throne. Instead, there is only Tyrion's measured politeness, offered like a cloak that does not quite reach her hands, and Littlefinger's gaze, soft as silk and twice as dangerous. He speaks of rescue, of choices, of ships and hiding places, the way important words are sometimes spoken in a room with no witnesses. But Sansa has begun to hear the shadow under his offers. The Lannisters are recalculating. With Jaime still a hostage, Sansa's bruises are fewer, Joffrey's worst impulses checked by Tywin's quiet reminders of value and leverage. He does not forbid cruelty, he redirects it. Why risk a broken toy when the girl can be a marriage, a treaty, a shield against northern vengeance? So the cage grows safer and smaller at once. Doors close with courtesy, chains are forged from parchment and promise. And so she stands in the throne room one morning before the jagged metal of the Iron Throne, the hall heavy with heat and watching eyes. Joffrey lounges above, crown crooked, voice sharp as he plays at judgment. Sansa looks up and feels not only fear, but the slow, suffocating understanding that every path out of this hall now runs through Lannister hands alone. Unless somewhere far to the north, another choice is already moving toward her, unseen. Far from the heat of the Iron Throne room, the air in the Riverlands is thin and cold, carrying the smell of wet earth and wood smoke. Robb Stark rides at the head of his host beneath a grey sky, banners snapping above him like living things, grey wind pacing close enough that the great dire wolf's fur brushes the king's boot. They move as an army that has known victory and has not yet learned its full cost. The Lannister raiding parties have been scattered, a few minor castles taken, songs already forming at the edges of campfires. Yet each mile south and west is also a mile further from Winterfell, from the rooms where his father once walked, from the quiet certainty that came with being only a son and not a king. Word of his broken Frey betrothal follows the column like a second unseen standard. Men do not speak of it often, but when they do, they lower their voices, the way important words are lowered in a sept or before a weirwood. Walder Frey's insulted pride, his long memory, the slighted daughters and granddaughters, all of it rides with them as surely as the baggage train. Jane's presence, or Talisa's if one prefers that telling, is another, softer shadow. A southern queen in a northern tent, skilled hands stained with herbs or blood, eyes that do not yet understand what northern winters demand. Robb loves her with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table already crowded with steel. But love does not soothe insulted allies. It sharpens it. He does not see that clearly. Not yet. Jaime Lannister still lies in a Stark cell in Riverrun, chained and watched, his golden hair dulled by darkness and time. As long as the Kingslayer remains a captive, Robb believes there is a line Tywin will not cross, a depth of dishonour the old lion cannot risk, while his heir's life hangs on northern restraint. What if that belief is the most dangerous comfort of all? What if the single decision that seemed to grant him leverage has instead taught him to trust in limits his enemies do not feel? Around Robb the grumbling grows, quiet but constant. Lord Karstark's grief sits on his shoulders like armour, heavy and ill-fitted, every glance toward the king, measuring the distance between justice and vengeance. Roose Bolton rides with his pale men, voice soft, eyes unreadable, speaking of supply lines and prudent withdrawals, the way a man might speak of weather he cannot change but can use. Robb hears them, he answers with courtesy, with reason, with that open northern honesty that once felt like strength. He does not hear the smaller sounds, a captain's muttered doubt, a servant's rumour about Frey crossings, the slow erosion of certainty at the edges of loyalty. One night, under a sky without moon, He bends over a map by the fire. Rivers and roads lie before him in ink and parchment. The twins a narrow throat through which his whole future must one day pass. His finger traces a path north and west, a loop that might bring him back to Walder Frey with terms, with apologies, with hostages to trade. In another camp far away, other hands also move over maps. Tywins stained with wine and old battles. Roses pale and careful. Their ink is darker. Their choices already turning toward a kind of betrayal Robb has not yet learned to imagine. What if, while those darker inks dry on distant maps, time itself becomes the only weapon left in the Stark arsenal? In the deep places of Riverrun, weeks lengthen into something harder to name. Jaime's cell is a stone room with no true day, only a paler shade of darkness that seeps through the slit of a window when the sun remembers him. His hair hangs longer now, clumped and uneven. His beard gone from fashionable stubble to something that itches and stinks. The manacles have rubbed his wrists raw, red grooves turn to scabs, scabs torn open again every time he shifts his weight and misjudges the chain. At first he counts the days. He speaks of release as if it is inevitable, as if Tywin Lannister is simply taking the long way around to reach him. He does not imagine any other ending. But the way a man's certainty erodes is quiet. One missed message, one raven that never comes. The silence between footfalls in the corridor grows wider until it is a kind of winter all its own. In that stillness, memories have room to move. The Mad King's laughter comes back first, high and thin, the way important words about wildfire and obedience tangle together in the throne room's heat. Jaime remembers the smell of burning flesh, the feel of his sword sliding in between ribs that had worn a crown. Then Bran's fall, a small body in the tower's cold air. The impact he did not see but can hear now in the drip of water from the ceiling. Cersei's touch follows, softer, the only warmth he ever trusted. And even that warmth begins to feel like a chain when he replays the moment he pushed the boy and understands with new and unwelcome clarity what he chose for her sake. There is no Brienne here to call him Oathbreaker and force his defences into words. Only his thoughts, circling like caged lions, wearing grooves in the stone. A guard leaves an extra crust of bread one night, not as a favour to a lord, but with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Another time, Jaime wakes to find his blanket pulled higher against the cold. He does not see who did it. Once, Catelyn Stark passes the open door as they move him to a different chain. Her face has hardened into something like carved ice, but grief still lives in the shadows around her eyes. She does not speak to him. She does not need to. The way a man like that is looked at by a mother who has lost children is a mirror sharper than any insult. It is here, not on a bloody riverbank with his right hand severed, that Jaime begins to understand the cost of being Tywin's son. What if his father never comes? What if the Lord of Casterly Rock has already weighed one golden heir against a cleaner victory and found the scales wanting? The thought settles over him like dust. Slow, inevitable. Without the shock of steel slicing bone, his path toward any kind of honour is slower, turned inward. No sudden break, only the horror of realising that he might die in chains and that the songs, if they remember him at all, will remember only the worst of him. One night, when the corridor is empty and the torches burn low, he tests a different kind of courage. His voice comes out rough, almost unused. "If I walk out of here," he whispers to the stone, "I will not waste it. Not again." There is no answer, only stale air, and the faint echo of a vow no one hears but him. In another part of the castle, far from the stale stone of Jaime's cell, there is the sound of water, not the roar of a great river in flood, but the quieter music of it pressed into human shape. A shrine by the banks of the tumblestone, candles guttering in the damp, riverlight moving over carved stone faces that have listened to too many prayers to be surprised by one more. Catelyn Stark stands with her sleeves pushed back, fingers dipped into water so cold it burns. She does not speak at first. The gods, if they are listening, already know the choice she did not make. The key she did not turn. Still, the way important words lodge in the throat demands some reckoning. So at last she gives them voice, not for what she did, but for what she has left undone. In the tale we know, her hands are not clean. In that tale she slips into Jaime's room with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table and breaks her son's command for the sake of her daughters. In that tale, the cost of mercy is counted in oaths broken, banners lost, and a wedding hall turned red, until even death cannot quiet her, and she rises again as Lady Stoneheart, all fire burned out, only winter and vengeance left. Here that thread never quite catches. The chains remain. The Kingslayer does not ride south with a blue-eyed maid, and Catelyn's guilt takes on a different shape. She has not betrayed Robb in deed, yet she has in thought, and the understanding of that sits in her like a stone. What kind of mother leaves her girls in a city of lions? What kind of Stark even weighs treason against duty and finds the scales uncertain? The fracture runs inward instead of outward. She moves through the rooms of Riverrun as if through a half-lit dream, present at councils, precise in her words, but the boldness that once drove her to seize Tyrion on the high road, to argue for risks and sudden strikes, has thinned. She speaks of caution now, of hostages and harvests, of winter coming and the shadow of Tywin Lannister's patience. He does not have Jaime, and that makes him more dangerous, not less. Robb feels it, the way a man feels a draught in a closed room. His mother's hand lingers on his arm a heartbeat longer when he rises from the table. Her counsel circles back again and again to holding what they have, to keeping the remaining sons close, as if proximity alone could anchor them against the current. At the riverside, she lets the cold climb her wrists, imagines the same water flowing past King's Landing, past some hidden quay where Sansa and Arya might once have stood. Somewhere downstream, a city of red stone and golden lions waits, indifferent to her prayers. She wonders, not for the first time, whether the gods punish more harshly the sins we commit, or the acts of mercy we never dare. And as the candles flicker, something shifts in the darkness behind her, as if the river is not the only thing that has begun to move. By the time the Raven's shadow reaches King's Landing, the city has already begun to fray. The war is no longer a story told in wine-sweet words in the throne room. It is the lengthening line outside the bakeries, the thin loaves, the way a man in flea bottom will stare too long at a gold-cloaked sword and then look away. Smoke hangs over the city even on clear days, a sour mix of tallow, dung fires, and the river's slow rot. Women mutter in the food lines, not quite daring to speak Joffrey's name, but cursing the war, the Lannisters, the red keep that eats and eats while their children's bellies stay empty. Every decree from the Iron Throne feels a little sharper, every whim from the boy king more dangerous, because hunger is a kind of dry winter that settles first in the eyes. In the Queen's chambers, the air is different, thick with incense and old wine. Cersei holds each new report from the Riverlands with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, though her hands are not gentle. She reads of skirmishes, burned villages, prisoners taken and exchanged, and she waits for one name that never appears, Jaime. The way important words fail to be written becomes its own kind of message. He does not ride in with Tywin's banners. He does not send some mocking note in his quick, arrogant hand. Silence becomes an accusation, and she turns it inward and outward both. Why has her father not moved heaven and earth, castle and coin, to bring back his heir? Why does every council meeting that dares to speak of terms with Robb Stark feel like a quiet admission that Jaime is a piece Tywin is willing to leave on the board? Her fear coils around her power, Without her twin at her side, without the golden sword that once made courtiers step lightly, her place in the room feels less certain. She watches Sansa Stark more closely, sees in the girl's bowed head not only a hostage, but a threat, a reminder that the North still has something to bargain with that she does not. Her temper grows shorter, the slaps come faster, the promises of mercy thinner. If the Starks hold Jaime, what might they demand for his safe return? Joffrey's bride, Joffrey's crown. Below, Tyrion walks the walls and the counting rooms, listening to the city breathe. He speaks of wildfire with the alchemists, of grain with Pater Baelish, of gates and chains with Bronn, all the while turning over a single quiet calculation. How to bring Jaime back without handing Robb Stark the victory his banners have not yet won. A trade of Kingslayer for King's Hand, a marriage pact reshaped, or is every path toward his brother's freedom a path that leads in the end to his own destruction? The Tyrells arrive into this tension like gardeners into a burned field. Margaery walks the corridors with soft steps and open eyes, noting the empty place where a famous knight should stand beside his sister. Olenna listens in the Queen's ballroom and in the sept, hearing the way important words like heir and legacy are spoken with a new, brittle edge. A dynasty whose golden sun is in chains is both in need and in danger. Their roses might root here, or be cut down when the next wind shifts. It shows most clearly in the small council. The room is close, the air thick with wax and old quarrels. Joffrey sprawls, bored and bright as a blade left in the sun. Cersei drinks. Tyrion shuffles ledgers. Varys and Baelish trade their usual shadows. When a cautious suggestion of prisoner exchange rises, carefully worded, almost bloodless, Jaime's name enters the air like smoke, and the room goes still. No one speaks of him as brother or son, not at first. They speak of leverage, of appearances, of what Robb Stark might demand, of what Tywin will or will not bear. Yet under every calculation lies the same understanding. As long as Jaime Lannister remains in northern hands, each of them is a little less safe. Each of their futures hangs from a different hook. Who prospers if he never returns? Who falls if he does? The candles gutter. Joffrey laughs, high and thin, and dismisses talk of trades as weakness. Cersei's jaw tightens. Tyrion watches her, weighing costs. Somewhere beyond the city's red walls, a man in chains breathes northern air, and the war bends, almost imperceptibly, around his absence. What if the song most people remember as a slaughter never quite becomes one? At least not yet. What if the twins fill first with the thick quiet of insult and calculation, rather than with the screaming that will one day stain their name? In the true line of events, the Red Wedding is not only cruelty, it is accounting. Tywin Lannister looks at a war that has dragged on through too many seasons, at gold bleeding from his coffers, at the way a man like Walder Frey will never forget being shamed before all the realm, and he chooses the cheapest, ugliest end. One feast, one night, and the young wolf, his mother, much of the northern and riverland nobility are cut down together. No more long campaigns in the snow, no more songs about Robb Stark, only silence, and a crown that no longer trembles. But all of that rests on a particular balance of hostages and heirs. In that world, Jaime has already been loosed, riding south under Brienne's watch, the Lannisters' most valuable son moving steadily back toward his father's shadow. Here, Jaime remains in a stone room, iron on his wrists, the cold of the Riverlands seeping into his bones. Every lord at Riverrun understands what that means, even if they do not speak of it with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Any blade raised against Robb Stark's line now also hovers over Tywin's. Tywin is capable of terrible things. He is not careless. He does not throw heirs away without weighing the cost. To order a massacre of Starks and Tullys while Jaime is still a northern captive would be to invite an answering stroke that no gold could buy back. What use is a Lannister victory if the Rock's future lies headless in some damp cell? So the shape of the Red Wedding bends. It does not vanish. It becomes softer in appearance, harder in intent? What if, instead of crossbows loosed into a king's back, the twins become a trap of words and wine? Robb might be welcomed with all the outward forms of apology, bread and salt, music, a bride brought forward with downcast eyes, and behind it, Rose Bolton's pale gaze, Walder Frey's thin mouth, and letters already exchanged with Casterly Rock. In such a hall, the knives need not seek Robb's heart. They can seek his bannermen instead, a Lord of Carhold who will not bend, a Blackwood too stubborn to forget, a Great John Umber who will not kneel while breath remains. Poison in one cup, a sudden fall from a gallery, a quarrel loosed in the confusion of a drunken quarrel, accidents that are not accidents, each one stripping the north of sinew while leaving its young king apparently untouched. And then the real work begins. Frey insult turned to Frey leverage, Rose speaking of winter and survival, Tywin's terms arriving like a cold wind, hostages, oaths, a marriage to bind Stark to Frey, and always the unspoken threat that Jaime's life hangs on Robb's obedience as much as Robb's hangs on Jaime's. The way important words are arranged in that treaty will matter more than any sword drawn that night. Imagine Robb seated beneath the cross towers, a cup in his hand, the hall too warm, the air too thick. He feels the trap without quite seeing its edges, understands that one wrong choice could drown his house in blood, yet finds every path narrowed to humiliation or ruin. The musicians play on. The doors remain closed. For this one night, the slaughter is stayed. The true killing has only been delayed, written into the future like a promise. Somewhere, a raven waits for a message that will decide which king bleeds first. When Robb Stark rides to the twins in this colder version of the tale, it is not with the fire of a young conqueror, but with the slow, measured tread of a man walking into a room where the cost has already been tallied against him. The towers rise out of the river mist like grey fingers, and every arrow slit feels like an eye. The music reaches him before the words of welcome do. Too loud, too eager. The way a man laughs too quickly at a jest, he does not find amusing. The courtyard is thick with Frey men-at-arms, ranks of mail and leather lining the walls in ordered silence, while Walder's brood offers forced smiles. Robb dismounts beneath their gaze, cloak heavy with winter damp, understanding at once that this is not a homecoming, not even a reconciliation. It is an inspection. His bannermen feel it too. Great John's hand never quite leaves his sword. The Blackfish's eyes move, counting doors, counting shadows. Inside, the feast unfolds as it once did in another telling, but the crossbows do not sing. Not yet. Trenchers are set down with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, and the musicians play on, a little too loudly, as if sound alone could drown out the quiet calculation in every corner. Walder Frey needles Robb with a thin, reedy amusement, speaking of broken promises, of pretty Westerling girls, of the way important words like guest and oath seem to have slipped from the young king's understanding. Robb endures it. He does not rise, does not let his voice sharpen. He speaks of amends, of new terms, of a future campaign against the Lannisters that will enrich every house present. Walder only smiles, the smile of a man who has already chosen which way the river will run. Around the high table, Rose Bolton's pale eyes give away nothing, but his men sit just a little too close to the northern lords, boots angled for quick movement. The doors close when the pies are half eaten. The music falters, then resumes in a thinner, more uncertain strain. Steel does not flash openly, but hands find hilts, and in the space between one song and the next, the mood tilts from brittle festivity into something harder. Frey and Bolton men rise as one, not attacking, only surrounding, until every lord of the north and Riverlands finds himself ringed in cold faces and ready blades. Only then does Walder produce the parchment, not his own words, of course. Tywin Lannister's, carried north like a quiet kind of doom. Robb is to bend the knee to the Iron Throne. Jaime Lannister is to be released at once. The Trident's crossings will pass to Frey control in perpetuity, and disputed lands along the Green Fork will be ceded as well. Hostages will be given, great names, true-born heirs, perhaps even Catelyn Stark herself, to sit in the Red Keep's long shadows as living guarantees. Robb reads in silence. Around him his lords shift, anger and fear moving through the room like a slow wave. What is a king when his sword arm is bound by parchment? What is the North if its freedom survives only as a word spoken carefully in private, never again in open hall? He looks up at Walder, at Rose, at the men who have already chosen humiliation over blood. His own blood will not stain these rushes tonight. But as he reaches for the quill, understanding settles on him like new forged mail, heavy and inescapable. Something in the North is about to die here, quietly, under watchful eyes, and far away in King's Landing, another hand waits to receive this same parchment, ready to decide whether mercy or a different kind of killing will follow. The parchment goes out into the wider darkness, carried on wings and rumour. Time passes in the way it always does in war, slowly for the waiting, brutally fast for the dying. When the answer finally comes, it does not arrive as a single word, but as a day. They bring Jaime Lannister up at dawn. The corridor to the Riverrun cells is narrow, damp, lit by torches that burn low and mean. Chains clink in a tired rhythm as he walks, blinking against each new flare of light. By the time they reach the yard, the sky is a pale, wintry grey, the sort of colour that makes men pull their cloaks closer without thinking. He squints, not only from the sudden brightness, but from the simple strangeness of open air after stone. Catelyn is waiting on the steps that lead to the great hall. She stands very straight, hands folded, the posture of a woman who has decided and is now learning the cost of that decision in real time. She watches the Kingslayer cross the yard and thinks of Sansa's red hair under southern sun, of letters written in a careful, frightened hand. She thinks of Tywin Lannister's cold understanding, the way a man like that counts, leverage the way other men count sons. This is their last real piece on his board. She knows it, Robb knows it, the Riverlords watching from the walls know it, even if no one speaks the thought aloud. He does not. Robb stands beside her, jaw tight, the wolf's head cloak heavy on his shoulders. When he speaks of the terms, his voice is formal, almost distant, as if the words have been hammered flat to keep from cutting him. Jaime for Sansa, and for the girl the South still calls Arya. A ceasefire along the Tumblestone and Red Fork. No raids, no burning, not for a season. Hostages exchanged, Tully and Westerling for Lannister and Frey, names laid out with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. The way important words move through the room matters. Honour, truce, safe conduct. Each one is wrapped in courtesy, in seals and signatures, yet everyone present can feel how thin it all is, how easily winter wind might tear it. For Jaime, the moment is both release and sentence. The chains are real, but so is the air on his face, the smell of horses and cold river water. Relief moves through him like a brief, unwelcome warmth. Then comes the other thing. King's Landing, his father's judgment, Joffrey's cruelty, Cersei's eyes. He has had long, quiet nights to imagine each of them. Too many. He looks at Robb, at Catelyn, at the northern men who kept him breathing when killing him would have been simple. There is a grudging respect there now, something he would not name, born from the way they argued over his life instead of ending it. What kind of enemy fights itself over whether to show mercy? Pattern breaks here. For a heartbeat he imagines refusing, imagines choosing the darkness of the cell over the bright, uncertain cruelty of home. He does not. Later, when the papers are sealed and the horse is ready, they walk him to the narrow bridge that spans the river between Stark and Lannister lines. The water below is high from recent rain, churning, flecked with white like torn parchment. On one bank, grey and blue banners lift in the wind. On the other, crimson and gold wait like a fire at the edge of a wood. Each plank under his boots feels like a separate choice, each step a small betrayal of the men behind him and the kin ahead. The bridge sways, just enough to remind him of the drop. His life and the war's next movement hang there together, balanced over the shadowed current as he walks from one world into another. What if the girl who leaves King's Landing does not ride out in secret at night, but walks through the daylight with the whole city watching, her freedom written in ink and circled in steel? The morning is pale when they bring Sansa from her chamber. The Red Keep stones hold the night's coolness, but there is a different chill in the air, the way a man might feel in a quiet room before an execution. She moves between gold cloaks and crimson cloaks, the colours blurring at the edge of her vision, and every step down those familiar stairs feels like walking through a story she once told herself about rescue. It does not feel like rescue now. Outside the gates, the city is already awake. Fishwives pause with their baskets, small folk crane for a better look, a boy points and is cuffed for it. She hears the murmur travel ahead of her like a shadow. Stark girl. Hostage. Traded. Not a princess reclaimed, only a piece moved. She keeps her chin high because that is what her mother would wish, but her hands will not stop shaking inside her sleeves. Hope comes in thin, sharp flashes. A raven winging ahead to River Run. Her mother's face when she sees her. Robb's voice saying her name the way he did in Winterfell's yard. Before crowns and banners and war. Yet hope sits beside other things. The understanding that Tywin Lannister does nothing without cost. The fear that some last moment word from the Tower of the Hand will call her back. That they will find a pretext, a forgotten clause, some whispered treason to say she cannot go after all. He does not come to see her off. Joffrey is kept away, whether from pride or calculation, and in his absence the escort feels stranger, more formal. A maester reads the terms with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Sansa hears her own name, hears the way important words like ward and guarantee and good faith sit beside it, heavy as chains. She is to be delivered into her brother's custody, but under the eye of the crown. Her marriage is reserved to royal approval. Her movements, in practice, are to be watched. What kind of homecoming is it, if every door she passes through carries the South's shadow with it? Tywin's hand is in every line. There will be Lannister-friendly advisors attached to her household, men who speak of protection and stability and the king's peace. There may be a betrothal waiting in some sealed letter, tying her not to a northern lord of her mother's choosing, but to a crown loyalist whose loyalty runs south along the King's Road. Freedom, on paper, a subtler captivity in truth. On the deck of the ship, or at the edge of the camp where the road bends north, she stands very still. The wind tastes of salt and distant pine. Somewhere ahead lies Winterfell. But the Winterfell in her mind is all snow and safe firelight and her father's voice. She understands, with a clarity that hurts, that the place she is sailing toward cannot be that untouched hall. War has gone before her. War is bringing her back. And the home she returns to will be a different room entirely, where every word she speaks may yet be counted as a move in someone else's game. The Riverlands receive the news before Arya does. Word travels the way important words always travel in wartime. Half-truth and echo, crossing burned fields faster than any rider, changing shape each time it passes another fire. Somewhere between a blackened village and a stand of bare willows, a thin girl with a sword too small for her anger hears men in brown and green speak of peace. The Brotherhood without banners has taken her in as they take in so many. Another child pulled from the wreckage and folded into their wandering cause. She sits close to the quiet of their flames, listening as they speak of a grand treaty at River Run, of oaths bent and crowns acknowledged, of a Stark girl sent home at last. She does not hear everything, she hears enough. A Stark girl returned. The words land strangely, as if they have been thrown into the wrong room. For a moment she wonders if this is some cruel mistake, if the Lannisters have found her name again and wrapped it round some other poor child. Then the talk moves on, back to tolls and patrols, and which lord has changed his colours this week, and no one looks at her as if she is the prize of any bargain. In Riverrun's Great Hall, the misunderstanding is laid bare with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. A Lannister envoy, pale with the knowledge of how Tywin weighs failure, recites the list of what can be given and what must be received. Jaime for the North's obedience in all but name. Sansa Stark restored. Hostages exchanged. Marches defined. The fire of open war banked to embers. And then the question that hangs in the air like smoke. And the younger girl? He does not meet Robb's eyes when he admits it. The Lannisters never had Arya. A butcher's boy. A dead direwolf. A lost child in the chaos of King's Landing's first spasm of darkness. Somewhere in the back of the room, Catelyn understands that the story she told herself on the night she almost freed Jaime, the story in which both her girls could be brought back with one desperate choice, was always thinner than it felt. Robb stands the way a man stands when every choice has a cost he cannot pay in full. To trade Jaime now, to bend in any fashion, knowing one daughter is still a shadow on a broken road, is to admit that victory will never mean wholeness. Catelyn feels it as a physical thing. This failure of a mother to gather all her children into one safe winter hall. She speaks of duty, of the lives that might yet be spared if the war is allowed to end, but the words taste like ash. For Tywin, the correction is an irritation and an opportunity. A missing Stark girl is a loose thread, yes, but also a problem that does not sit in his dungeons demanding rations and guards. He calculates the way a man like him always calculates. If Arya lives, she might become a banner for northern stubbornness, a small figure around whom old wrongs could gather. Yet she is also leverage in absence, a reminder he can press upon Robb and Catelyn whenever they grow too proud of what this peace has purchased. What if, he wonders, in some quiet inner room, the North one day claims its wrongs amended? He will have only to speak Arya's name to prove that the ledger is still open. Out in the ruined countryside, the girl herself moves like a ghost through the aftermath she does not know she still embodies. At a half-collapsed inn on the crossroads, she crouches in the shadows of a broken wall as a Lannister patrol rides past, red cloaks dulled by dust. She holds her breath, fingers tight around Needle's hilt, every muscle waiting for the shout that does not come. They pass within 10 yards of her hiding place. One of the men laughs at some low joke about treaties and tamed wolves. Another complains about being sent so far from the capital now that the worst of it is over. Arya lets them go. She does not know that in a tent by the river her name has just been spoken like a missing piece of a game board. That piece is being signed and sealed without her. She only knows that the war feels quieter now, and that the quiet is somehow more frightening than the fire. Because something in this stillness is wrong, and the next time she hears her own name, it will not be from a friend's mouth. The quiet does not last. Far to the south, another kind of stillness breaks as the gates of the Red Keep yawn open and a column of gold and crimson wins its way into the yard. There is no shambling, maimed knight at the head, no massive woman in blue and steel. There is only Jaime Lannister, whole in body, thinner at the jaw, the way a man looks after too many nights in a stone room where the darkness presses close. He swings down from the saddle with the old grace, but something in the movement is slower, considered as if he is testing the ground. The court has learned to live without him. That knowledge hangs in the air like smoke. Lannister guards do not surge forward in relief. They step aside with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. An heirloom returned, but not quite trusted. Cersei is there before the others, green eyes bright, mouth already forming his name. For a heartbeat, it is almost as it was in their youth, when the world was smaller and their choices felt like a private game. She reaches for him, fingers fierce at his shoulders, and the embrace is not decorous, not queenly. It is possession. Relief floods her first. Then almost at once, the shadow of something colder. He was gone. He allowed himself to be taken. In his absence, she has bargained with Tywin, with Littlefinger, with the Tyrells, has bent where she wished to burn. The way important words were spoken over her head in council rooms without him has left a bruise she does not name. She pulls back, studies the lines at the corners of his eyes. "You took your time," she says, light on the surface, but the cost is there beneath. He hears it. He does not answer at once, because any word will be the wrong one. Tywin's welcome waits in the throne room, not in the yard. That is its own judgment. When Jaime enters, the hand is already by the Iron Throne, pale gold head bowed over parchments that smell of wax and old decisions. He looks up, takes in his son from boots to brow, and for a moment the mask slips. There is something like relief, quickly shuttered. The embrace is brief, armour against brocade. Tywin speaks of campaigns, of treaties, of how the war bent around the absence of its brightest sword. He does not say, "I was afraid." He does not say, "I'm glad you are alive." He speaks of opportunity lost, of hostages that could not be risked, of a peace signed that fell short of total victory because his heir sat in a northern cell. Jaime listens, the way a man listens to a tally of debts he did not know he owed. As he walks the familiar halls afterward, Riverrun comes with him, the damp in the stones, the clink of chains at night, the understanding that his freedom was a transaction. Was he traded because he was loved, or because a lion that cannot move is only a story? What if it is both? What if it is neither? The shadows in the Red Keep feel longer now, as if winter has found a way into this southern fortress. Servants glance at him, then away. The Kingsguard cloak on his shoulders is light as cloth and heavy as judgment. He stops before the Iron Throne at last. Joffrey lounges above, crown crooked, fingers tapping on cold metal as if it were a toy. Jaime looks up at the boy he helped place there, at the careless cruelty in the set of his mouth, and something in him shifts, slow and weary. Disgust is not new to Jaime Lannister, but this is different. This is not the quick flare of anger at a fool. This is a tired, settling understanding of what his choices have built, and for the first time, he lets himself feel it. What if the hand that pushed a king never burned in horse dung and fever? What if the man who rode back into the capital wore both his golden sword hand and the quiet weight of chains no one in that room could see? Cannon gives him a clean break. Steel? A scream? And suddenly the Kingslayer is forced to live as a man who cannot easily kill, forced to watch a blue-clad knight move through the world with the stubborn, painful integrity he has spent half a life mocking. The way a man learns when every easy habit is taken from him is brutal, direct, impossible to ignore. Here, the habits remain. The sword still fits his grip. The maiming is inward. He returns from Riverrun whole in body, but the weeks in the dark, the understanding that Tywin did not move the world to win him back, settle in his bones. He does not say it aloud. He does not have Brienne to drag it from him with blunt questions and offended honour. There is no bathhouse confession, no moment where the way important words catch in his throat becomes a turning point shared with another soul. Instead, the confession is private, unfinished, circling itself in the quiet hours between councils. Without her, there is no relentless mirror held up to his worst stories. No one in King's Landing asks him whether oaths mean anything if they are only ever broken in the right direction. So he wrestles alone, in a court that rewards the very cynicism he is beginning, dimly, to despise. Joffrey's laughter over some fresh cruelty, Cersei's easy readiness to threaten a child, Tywin speaking of Sansa Stark as if she were a key to a northern door rather than a person. Each small scene is another stone on the scale. What if the family he killed a king to protect is the rot that will bring the roof down? The question comes slowly, the way winter light creeps across a floor, almost unnoticed until the room is different. He watches Joffrey torment Sansa at table and sees, not a lesson in power, but a boy playing with the idea of darkness as if it were a toy. He listens to Tywin measure the cost of the Red Wedding in neat, bloodless phrases, and the chains on his wrists in Riverrun feel suddenly present again. In this version, he may reach sideways instead of outward. He speaks of strategy with Tyrion, but the talk drifts now and then toward the shape of a life not entirely bound to Cersei's will or Tywin's design. Later, if Sansa is sent north under Lannister terms, there is a moment in some cold corridor where he could offer a warning, a quiet word about choices and traps, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Does that make him different, or only reveal what was always there? The road bends, even without a severed hand to mark the turn. It is longer, more shadowed, less dramatic without a blue-clad knight at its centre, but the memory of iron on his skin, of being expendable in his father's game, still presses. In time, it may yet push him away from the man who threw a boy from a tower, towards someone who can no longer bear the fire he helped light. And that pressure, once begun, is difficult to stop. In the months that follow, the pressure does not vanish. It settles instead, the way a man learns to live with an old wound that aches in the cold, a constant reminder beneath every movement. The North has bent. It has not quite broken. That distinction becomes the small, stubborn fire men warm their hands over when the nights grow long. Winterfell is a blackened shell, its stones split and charred, its great hall open to the sky. Snow gathers where a roof once stood. Ravens perch on the jagged teeth of fallen towers. Robb Stark does not rule there. He holds court instead in the damp, echoing hall of White Harbour, beneath painted mermen and the watchful, assessing gaze of Lord Manderley, or in some seasons at Deepwood Motte, where pine and sea wind press close against the palisade. He is called Lord Paramount of the North now, not king, but the way important words are swallowed in public and poured out again in private tells its own story. The treaty that brought him back from the edge of ruin is ink and ash together. Tribute flows south along the King's Road. Coin, grain, timber, the quiet wealth of a hard country forced to feed a softer one. Hostages ride with it, young sons and daughters of old houses, sent to King's Landing as guarantees of good behaviour, their names spoken in northern halls with a tightness around the mouth. There are limits set on musters. Ravens must fly to Lannisport and the capital before banners may be called in great number. Lannister-friendly garrisons sit like stones in the boots of the north at Moat Cailin, at White Harbour's quays, in a rebuilt keep at Torrens Square, their presence explained as peacekeeping, as if peace were a thing that could be nailed into place with southern spears. The lords bear it as men bear different kinds of winter. Some, like the Umbers and Karstarks, seethe so openly that their wine tastes of iron. They speak of quiet rebellion in low rooms, of ravens that fly by night, of waiting for the first true misstep from the Iron Throne. Others counsel patience. Lady Maege Mormont, old Lord Serwyn, men and women who have counted costs all their lives, murmur that survival is its own kind of victory, that a dead wolf cannot guard any forest at all. And then there are those who thrive in the new shadow. Rose Bolton moves through this half-free north with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, every word measured, every bow exact. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. His banners are spotless, his obedience to the treaty ostentatious, his private reach into weaker houses slow and precise. The Lannister envoys write well of him. In this landscape, Catelyn Stark becomes something like a living vow. She rides from holdfast to holdfast, from White Harbour's stone quays to the damp green of the Barrowlands, her hair more streaked with grey each season, her eyes taking in every crack in the northern shield. She speaks of unity, of the cost of open defiance, while Sansa and the younger hostages sit beneath the Iron Throne's blades. At night, when the hall is empty and the fire burned low, she thinks of the dungeon at Riverrun, of a golden man who never rode south, of the choices she did not make and the darkness that followed anyway. There are nights when the hall at White Harbour is full, the air thick with smoke and salt, and the murmur of men who have eaten well for the first time in weeks. The Lannister captain at the high table lifts his cup to the health of King Tommen or Joffrey, or whoever wears the crown that year, and the toasts are loud, dutiful, hollow. Later, when the Southerners have gone to their quarters and the room has grown quieter, another cup is raised. A younger man, perhaps a Manderley cousin with too much wine in him, stands and says, almost gently, "To the king in the north." The words are soft, but the heat in them is not. Robb's jaw tightens. Catelyn's hand closes around the stem of her cup. No raven will ever carry that toast. No scribe will ever set it down in ink, but it hangs in the air like breath on a winter morning. How long can a kingdom kneel in public and stand upright in its own heart? How many winters can it endure under a lion's shadow before the old, buried fire demands more than sullen obedience? The answer is already beginning to take shape, far from White Harbour's walls, in a place where no Lannister garrison stands watch. It takes shape in snow. Not at White Harbour's quays, not beneath a lion banner, but in a courtyard where the wind moves the way a man drawing breath before speaking does, slow and deliberate, testing the cold on his tongue. Whether this is Riverrun under a pale river winter or a half-rebuilt Winterfell, its stones blackened and stubborn, Sansa walks with her cloak tight at her throat and listens to the crunch of frost beneath her boots. The sound is familiar. The place is not. Or not anymore. She passes men in grey and muted river colours, women with chapped hands and guarded eyes, boys drilling in the yard with blunted swords. They look at her the way important words are looked at when they are read aloud in a quiet room, with attention, with a kind of fear, with the understanding that once spoken they cannot be recalled. Lady Sansa, the wolf maid who knelt in the Red Keep and rose again under a different sky. To them she is a survivor of Lannister darkness, the girl who smiled beside a boy king while ravens brought news of burned villages and broken oaths. She is also the proof of it, a living reminder of the North's humiliation, the cost of southern mercy and southern treachery bound up in one slim body. Every time a lord's gaze lingers on her, she feels the weight of questions they will not voice. What did you see? What did you suffer? What did you endure in silence? They do not ask. Not yet. Instead, they speak of matches. A Karstark cousin, perhaps, to bind up an old wound. A Manderley heir, heavy with ships and silver, to answer White Harbour's wary half-kneel. Some even murmur, very low, of a southern-leaning lord offered by treaty, a man whose presence at her side would be a chain disguised as courtesy. Once, in a council where the fire burned low and tempers lower, someone lets another name slip, almost idly, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Jaime Lannister. The word moves through the room like a draught under a door, a grotesque reconciliation, lion and wolf, bound in marriage, the hostage and the captor's daughter made a single glittering sign of peace. She does not hear everything. She hears enough. She hears her own name set beside his, and feels her stomach turn, not only with revulsion, but with the sharp, cold knowledge that such a thing could be done if the game required it. What if this is all she will ever be now? A piece to be shifted from one board to another, from gilded cage to snow-dusted yard, the rules colder but unchanged. She thinks of King's Landing then, of the way a man like Joffrey smiled when he hurt something smaller than himself, and of the way important words, promise, protection, love, had been spoken there and found hollow. She does not long for that city. She longs for the girl who once believed in it, because that girl did not know the shape of the choices waiting for her. Here in the north that is and is not hers, Sansa finds that survival has its own shadow. Men watch her not only with pity, but with calculation. A nod from her, a word, could soothe an insult, mend a feud, tilt a hall toward one banner or another. She begins to see it, slowly, the way one might see constellations in a sky that first appears only black. When she speaks, even to ask for more salt at table, conversation still slightly around her, measuring. He does not stand beside her in these councils the way Jon once did in other tellings, a quiet shield at her shoulder. In this world, his absence is another kind of presence, an empty place at her right hand that makes the eyes on her feel sharper. No husband, no sworn brother, no southern knight bound to her by a private vow. Only Sansa, and the North, and the men who must decide what to make of both. One evening she stands at a narrow window high above the yard. Snow falls outside, soft and steady, blurring banners and boot tracks into the same pale anonymity. Her breath fogs the glass. Below she can see a cluster of men in cloaks talking, heads bent, glancing up toward her tower. Something in Jon's chest moves in another life when he looks at her window. Here, it is Sansa's chest that tightens, because she understands at last the game did not end when she left the Red Keep. It only changed rooms. The board is stone instead of marble now. The pieces are colder, and she is still on it. What if the war follows her, not in banners and battles, but in the quiet way men at a fire lower their voices when a girl with a wooden sword comes too close? What if the end of open slaughter only drives the real conflict into darker rooms, into the space between one muttered word and the next? For Arya, it begins as fragments. A snatch of talk in a smoky inn about a young king who bent the knee rather than see his people starve. A drunk in a corner, speaking with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, of a lion kept in chains so a lady in silk might be kept in a gilded cage. She does not hear everything. She hears enough. The North, they say, is at peace now, watched by southern gold and southern eyes. The words do not fit together at first. Peace, treaties, a captive Kingslayer never sent home, a Stark girl safe in the capital, smiling beside the boy who ordered her father's death. The way important words are spoken around her, not to her, makes something in her chest twist. A cold, thin anger that feels older than she is. She does not understand the details. She understands the cost they are asking her to accept. Around the Brotherhood's fires, the talk shifts as the ravens fly. Some of the men sit easier, as if a weight has been set down. Thoros speaks of the Lord's will, of storms that have passed. A few of the younger ones laugh, wondering, half in hope and half in fear, whether they are now only common outlaws again. If the kings have made their peace, what right do they have to keep spilling blood? Arya listens, jaw tight. She does not raise her hand like a child in a hall lesson. She waits until there is a silence, the kind that comes when men are tired of their own voices. Then she says, as if stating a simple thing about winter or wolves, that the war is not over. Not while Joffrey sits the throne. Not while her brother wears a crown bought with kneeling. Not while the North is quiet, only because a Lannister is still breathing. They look at her the way a man might look at a ghost he half remembers from a story. A Stark girl in muddy boots, talking of thrones and freedom as if she has the right. Somewhere in the Riverlands, a farmer will tell his wife he saw a child with a wolf's eyes riding with outlaws. Somewhere on the King's Road, a hedge knight will repeat a tale of a dead lord's daughter who walks under the trees and will not bow. Rumour travels faster than ravens when the ground is ready for it. In keeps from the neck to the last river, men hear of a living Stark girl who will not be written off, and the story sits uneasily beside the neat, careful words of peace their new letters carry. That night, staring up at a dark rafters instead of a Winterfell ceiling, Arya adds another name to the list she whispers into the straw. Not only Cersei, Joffrey, Tywin. She breathes, almost without sound, the names of those in the North who chose safety over honour, quiet over justice. There will be a reckoning, she promises the darkness, and it will not care which colours a man once wore. The ravens do not carry Arya's whispered list. They carry tidings written in a steadier hand. Terms agreed, banners lowered. A war that ends not in a field of corpses, but in a room full of men choosing ink over iron. Elsewhere, other kings read those words in other kinds of silence. On Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon stands before his painted table, the sea muttering against the rock below, and listens as Davos reads out each clause of the Stark Lannister accord with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. A humbled North, still intact. Hostages exchanged. Oaths renewed to a boy king Stannis calls bastard with his eyes, even when he does not let the word pass his lips. He hears the shape of it and understands the cost. What is a king who claims all yet cannot break the wolf's den? What is a realm that calls this compromise peace? In the quiet after Davos is done, Stannis speaks of duty and law, but there is a new edge to the way important words like justice and right sound in his mouth. If the realm will not cleanse itself, he thinks, fire must do it. The shadow that Melisandre offers him no longer feels like temptation. It feels dangerously like necessity. In the Reach and in King's Landing, the same treaty tastes different. The Tyrells sit in their gardens beneath soft southern light, listening to Margaery describe a court where the north bends but does not break, where Lannister gold has bought time but not absolute dominion. For them, a north that survives, bitter, bloodied, but bound by fresh parchment, means the game is not yet settled. It means there are still pieces to move, alliances to weigh, futures to imagine in which Highgarden's rose twines not only around the Iron Throne, but around whatever winter brings. Across the sea wind of the western coasts, Balon Greyjoy receives the same news and feels only the narrowing of his chances. A north that has not been shattered cannot be plundered in the old way. Its coasts will not lie open like a corpse on a table. When his longships slip from the mist toward Deepwood Motte or Torrens Square, they meet not scattered holdfasts, but watchful men who remember how close their world came to ruin. The way a man remembers a hand at his throat. Raids that should have been easy victories become costly skirmishes. Captains mutter in low rooms about the wisdom of a war that yields so little silver for so much blood. Asher's quiet questions about another path for the Iron Islands find more ears willing to listen. The old Kraken may roar, but the water around him is changing. So the War of Five Kings is rewritten into something that looks, at a distance, like restraint. No sack of Winterfell by southern men. No endless grinding campaign in snow and darkness to drag stubborn wolves to heel. The Iron Throne saves its strength, yet cannot claim the clean, terrible triumph Tywin once imagined. On every side, the fractures remain. Crown and vassal, old gods and new fire and ice. All the lines that were drawn when the first swords were unsheathed are still there, only traced now in ink instead of blood. The banners are furled, the ravens fly, men tell themselves the choice has been made. But in Dragonstone's red-lit chambers, in Pike's salt-stinking halls, in the cold fastness of the north, other choices are already forming in the shadow of this peace, and one of them will not stay quiet for long. Years pass before anyone dares to call it peace. When we return to King's Landing, the streets look much the same. The fishmongers still shout by the river, the bells still toll for a dozen small devotions, the gold cloaks still tramp their weary circuits with spears on their shoulders and boredom in their eyes. Yet there is a quiet thickness to the air now, a sense of a room that has not been aired out since the last fire, where old smoke clings to the rafters and refuses to leave. The war has ended on parchment, not in understanding. No great victory feast ever marked a clean conclusion. No single battle drew a line under the cost. Instead, the realm slid into stillness, the way a man eases into cold water, inch by inch, telling himself it is not so bad. The north has not been broken, only contained, and everyone in the capital knows it, though few will let the word northern cross their lips above a whisper. On the Iron Throne, Joffrey sits a little taller, or his younger brother does in his stead, depending on how the years have treated the boy with the crossbow and the thin, cruel mouth. The crown is the same. The habits are the same. He does not have open rebels to torment now, so his cruelty turns inward, seeking softer, closer targets. A former northern hostage who flinches at the wrong jest. A lesser lord who once spoke too warmly of Robb Stark. A councillor who hesitates before agreeing that the Lannisters won. Punishments come like summer storms, sudden and oddly small. A tongue removed for seditious gossip. A house stripped of its words on a charter and given new ones, praising Lannister mercy. The way important words are altered on those scrolls says more than any speech in the throne room. It is not the red wedding, no single horror to fix in the mind. It is 100 petty acts of fear, each one leaving a faint, greasy shadow on the city's heart. In this slow rot, the Tyrells find their moment. They arrive with grain when the river traffic thins, with coin when the crown's ledgers show too much red. They speak of stability, of gardens that need careful tending after a hard winter of war. Quietly, in Solar and Sept, they let it be known that it was their gold and their food that kept the capital from starving while the North refused to bend fully. The Lannisters may hold the throne, but the Tyrells hold the harvest. Jaime watches all this from within the Red Keep's stone, his white cloak growing heavier with each passing year. There is no single day when he can say the realm lost itself. Instead, there are audiences where a frightened girl is mocked for her northern prayers, councils where another tax is laid on river trade to pay for yet more sellards, nights when the king's laughter echoes down the hall after some small inventive cruelty. Something in Jon's chest moves when he hears of these things in Winterfell's letters. Something in Jaime's chest moves when he stands beside the throne and does nothing. He does not draw his sword against any of it. He stands, as he once stood for Aerys, and feels the old familiar sickness. The way a man learns to live with a stone in his boot, he learns to live with this, telling himself there is no better choice that would not plunge the city back into open darkness. Pattern interrupt. One winter morning, a rumour runs through the lower city that the North has crowned a king again. It dies by nightfall, smothered by gold cloaks and careful terror. Yet in the brief hours when the whisper lives, men and women look up at the Red Keep with new measuring eyes. The Iron Throne still stands. It still cuts those who sit upon it, still glitters in torchlight, still draws every gaze in the throne room. But to the small folk in the alleys, and the lesser lords in their dim chambers, it no longer looks like the unassailable heart of a united realm. It looks like a hard, joyless chair of knives, holding a boy or a man who cannot afford to move. And somewhere far to the north, in a hall of wood and stone, another seat is being carved, not from swords, but from the long memory of winter and the understanding that this piece is only a pause. What if the Riverlands remember the war without a song of a woman clawing her way back from the water? What if there is no cold hand closing around the noose, no ruined voice naming fray after fray in the darkness beneath the trees? Without a feast of betrayal, there is no red wedding-style slaughter at the Twins, no moment where Catelyn's world ends with steel at her son's throat and her own blood on Walder Frey's floor. The fords are tense. The alliance is brittle, but Robb's banners are not butchered as guests. Catelyn does not die at Frey hands. And so the strange, terrible chain of mercy and miracle that led to Lady Stoneheart in canon simply never begins. Beric Dondarrion still walks the Riverlands as a man who has died too often, but he does not give his last fire to a corpse fished from a river. The land itself is no less wounded. Fields are trampled, villages burned, cattle taken and not returned. Lannister outriders still move like a red shadow along the roads, and broken men gather in the hedges with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, arranging ambushes around cook fires and broken wagons. The war has passed, but its echo remains, in empty rooms and in the way a man flinches when a rider's cloak shows even a hint of crimson. In canon, that emptiness is soon filled by stories of a ghost. Here, the Brotherhood without banners do not have a Stark-shaped spectre to gather their anger around. Thoros still wakes sweating from dreams of fire. Beric still speaks of oaths, and the small folk with the weary patience of someone who remembers a different kind of justice. They hang raiders, yes, and cut down Lannister men-at-arms when they can, but their nooses are fewer, their judgments less fevered. There is no silent lady whose presence turns every trial into a rehearsal for the red wedding that never was. What is lost in that absence, and what is spared? There are fewer brutal reprisals against Freys on lonely riverbanks, fewer carts found with every man beneath them swinging. Collaborators sleep a little easier. The cost of treachery feels more distant, more like a word in a lord's hall than a rope around the throat. Yet there are also fewer millers' sons mistaken for Frey squires, fewer widows left staring at a tree heavy with the wrong dead men. Somewhere in this quieter, still ruined country, Catelyn rides beneath bare branches and smoke-stained clouds. She hears the stories that do exist, of Beric's ragged court, of outlaws who sometimes protect and sometimes plunder, of Frey riders demanding grain with mailed fists. She does not hear her own name spoken with fear. She does not see her face half rotten in the flicker of a campfire. And yet she cannot help wondering, as she watches a burned village, as she steps into a room where a child curls against a cold hearth, she thinks of another world in which her corpse answered this suffering with rope and fire, which would have better served her people, the mercy that left her alive, or the retribution that might have made the Riverlands afraid. The war is ending. The reckoning is not. And the shape that reckoning takes will decide what kind of peace Robb and Jon are trying to carve from the bones of this realm. The war is ending, they say, yet on an island far from the Trident's red water, the sound is not of trumpets or feasts, but of steel biting wood in a quiet courtyard. Brienne of Tarth moves through a sequence she has practiced since girlhood, blade rising and falling, with that relentless, ungainly grace that once made knights laugh and then, slowly, fall silent. Squires line the wall, pressed into the stone's shadow by their own unease, watching the way a man watches a storm he does not yet understand. Her sword thuds against the post again. Again. The only other sound is the sea. Years have passed since Renly's green tent and the impossible shadow that took him. The stories of that night have frayed in the telling, turned into something half rumour, half warning. For Brienne there is no such blurring. She remembers the colour of the candles, the smell of wax and fear, the way important words about honour and protection had seemed to settle on her shoulders like a cloak she could finally claim. And then he died, and the cloak slipped. In another life, there might have been a hand to catch it. A tully woman in grey, hollow-eyed from grief, might have placed a new oath before her, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Guard my son's prisoners. Guard my daughter's hope. Ride with this lion and carve some rough, hard-won understanding out of his shame. Here, Catelyn Stark never opened that door. Jaime Lannister rots in a northern cell, and Brienne came home. She serves now in the household of a lesser Lord of Tarth, nominally a sworn sword, practically a curiosity. When a northern envoy comes by galley to speak of trade and winter grain, it is Brienne who rides beside his small escort from the shore, her blue cloak snapping in the salt wind. She listens as he speaks of Robb Stark's campaigns, of a queen in the north, of a war that bent but did not quite break. He does not speak of Sansa Stark by name. He does not know that the tall woman at his side is measuring each word against a life she never lived. Once, on the road to the island's little port, they pass a thin, hard-eyed girl travelling with a band of bravosy sailors, a girl who moves the way a man reaches for a knife without thinking. Brienne's gaze catches on her for a heartbeat, a prickle of recognition, a question she cannot quite form. Then the moment is gone, swallowed by rain and distance. What if she had been more certain? What if she had possessed not just skill, but the authority of a named protector, a charge spoken in front of witnesses and gods? At night she lies awake in her narrow room, watching the darkness shift against the rafters. The ache is not simply grief for Renly, though that is there, a steady bruise. It is the sense of a road missed, of a turning she never reached because someone else far away chose caution over desperation. She feels, without knowing why, that her sword was meant to stand between wolf children and the worst of the world, to prove that a woman's oath could hold as fast as any man's. Instead, there are tourneys where no one quite knows what to do with her, and guard duties that never test the edge of her steel. Victories without meaning, defeats without cost. Sometimes, after drilling the squires to exhaustion, she walks alone to the seawall and looks north, where the water darkens and the air tastes of coming winter. There is a road there, though it is made of waves and rumour, leading toward a kingdom she has never seen, and a family whose story keeps changing in half-heard reports. She stands very still, fingers resting on her sword hilt, as if waiting for a word that will not come. Somewhere beyond that horizon, choices are being made in rooms she will never enter. Somewhere, a Stark girl is alive, or dead, or lost. Brienne does not know that, in one of those rooms, a different kind of invitation is about to be offered, to someone far less suited to guard a wolf and far more willing to sell one. In that other room, the offer is not a sword or a shield, but a quill and a key. Jaime Lannister is not being loosed into the river night. He is being told, quietly, that his chains will remain, and that his value now lies in the way a man endures being owned. The days lengthen. The cell does not. He counts torch changes instead of leagues, listens to the soft thunder of the Tully godswood instead of the clash of armies. The hand that once shoved a boy from a tower is still whole, still strong, but the work it knows is denied to it, and something in him begins to rust. He does not lose himself in one bright catastrophic cut. He erodes, flake by flake, under the slow acid of humiliation, and the knowledge that his father will bargain with gold before honour. What kind of night is forged when the fire is not pain, but waiting? What kind of oath is left when the only thing a man can keep is his own understanding of what his word once meant? Far to the south, Sansa learns a different kind of stillness. She walks in Lannister rooms as a named hostage in every treaty draft, a girl whose survival is a paragraph, not a miracle. She listens to Cersei speak of mercy the way a man speaks of weather, something changeable and never entirely honest. She learns that smiles can be armour, and that courtesy, wielded carefully, is not performance but self-defence. When the terms finally come, her return north in exchange for a brother she has not seen since Winterfell, she steps into the agreement knowing that every polite word she offers from then on will be measured against the cost of her own release. Arya, hearing of it much later, hardens around a different fire. The knowledge reaches her in fragments. A mother who would not gamble a Kingslayer's life for hers. A brother who signed his name beneath Lannister ink. She does not hear everything. She hears enough. In the quiet between road camps and dark river crossings, she decides that the world is not only divided between wolves and lions, but between those who will bend for peace and those who will not. She rejects Lannister cruelty, yes, but also Stark compromise, sharpening her sense of justice against the shadow of choices she would never have accepted. And Catelyn lives. That is its own kind of sentence. She becomes, in halls that once whispered of her recklessness, the woman who stayed her hand. No red wedding blooms out of her desperation. No vengeful river spirit rises from her corpse. Instead, there is a mother who must sit in council rooms and hear her son speak of truces, who must walk past the cell where Jaime waits, and feel the weight of every life his continued breathing has bought or endangered. She speaks of restraint with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, knowing that half the room sees strength and half sees failure. Pattern interrupts itself here. Which of them is more real? The Jaime shattered in a single stroke, the Sansa remade by a sudden escape, the Arya orphaned by a song of guest right broken, the Catelyn whose throat is opened for a wolf's crown, or these quieter selves shaped by a choice that was never made and a word that was never spoken. In the end, is a person truer when defined by grand betrayals, or by the long, winter-dark corridors of compromise they learn to walk without witnesses? The war does not answer. It only moves them slowly toward the next room, where another choice waits, unseen. What if the ledger of this war is never written in one night's red ink, but in a long column of smaller, quieter entries that no singer bothers to name? In the world they have averted, men are butchered beneath a lord's roof, while the meat is still steaming on their trenches. Harps are playing when the first crossbow quarrels fall. A pregnant queen is stabbed again and again until even the killers look away. Guessed right, that old winter law is torn open like a throat, and for a heartbeat the whole realm sees what the Lannisters and Freys are willing to do when the doors are closed and the music is loud enough to drown the screams. Here there is no song drowned in terror. There is parchment, seals, a quiet room where men speak of grain levies and garrison rights with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Instead of slaughter in the hall at the Twins, there is a treaty signed at River Run and Winterfell, clauses that strip the North and Riverlands of the power to raise full hosts, clauses that bind heirs as hostages to the capital, clauses that let Lannister gold seep into every river town until the old loyalties are a memory. Is that mercy? Tywin would say so. He speaks of order, of sparing lives, of ending a war before it devours the realm. He does not speak of what it means when a people's winter stores are counted in someone else's tower, when their speech in the king's court must pass through Lannister mouths, when every road is watched by men whose lion's cloaks mark them as the same power that killed Ned Stark. It is still violence, only stretched thin, hidden in tax ledgers and oaths signed under duress rather than in piles of corpses on a feast hall floor. For the small folk in the North and Riverlands, the difference is not nothing. There are fewer sudden massacres, fewer burnt villages left smoking behind a marching host. Children grow to adulthood without seeing their sept turned into a charnel house. Yet the grind is constant, extra coin demanded at harvest, red and gold in every market square. The knowledge that their own lords bent the knee again to the same southern shadow that took their warden's head on the steps of the Great Sept. Some evils are clarifying. In the true history, the Red Wedding brands the Freys and Lannisters as oath-breakers beyond all excuse, the way a man's hand, once burned, will never again mistake fire for a harmless light. Here, the negotiated peace lets them keep their names, their titles, their careful words about stability and necessary cost. The realm's understanding blurs. Is a lord who signs away his people's autonomy under threat a traitor, or a saviour who spared them worse? So if you could choose, which winter would you prefer? One unforgettable atrocity that sears itself into memory and may yet kindle resistance, or a long season of civilised, almost reasonable oppression that never quite gives anyone cause to raise the banners again? The choice is made, treaties inked in rooms that still smell of river mist and old blood, when the first strange ravens begin to beat their wings south. At first they are only words on crumpled parchment, dead men walking in the snow, blue eyes burning where fire should be, wildling camps swelling like storm clouds against the wall. To a king who has spent years measuring cost and gain in gold and grain and hostages, it sounds like the madness of cold men too long in the dark. He does not move his banners for madness. In the north, the messages fall into a quieter world, one already bent under the weight of that careful, civilised submission. Robb reads them with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, not because he doubts the night's watch, but because he knows what answering will require. Their armies are capped by southern word and seal. Oaths have been sworn before septons and heart trees both. Every sword they raise beyond the agreed number is a visible act of defiance. Some lords would defy gladly. Others, who signed the peace and swallowed their pride, mutter that this is a southern trick, a pretext to break the treaty and bring the lions north in righteous fury. Old grudges have not vanished. They have gone to ground like wolves in deep winter. The way a man remembers humiliation is different from the way he remembers open war. It is quieter, more poisonous. It makes him slower to answer another's call. Into that slow, suspicious landscape, Sansa moves like someone who has learned to listen for the shape of danger in a room before anyone speaks of it. She knows the softness of King's Landing courtyards and the hard lessons that lived behind their beauty. She knows how quickly southern cynicism will dismiss talk of walking corpses, how northern stubbornness will bristle at any hint of being used. So she speaks of cost instead. Not banners, not vengeance, cost. The cost of doing nothing while the wildlings break upon the wall and pour south. The cost of letting Lannister quills in the capital decide which letters are madness and which are warning. The way important words can be lost between one Maester's desk and another lord's impatience. Jaime hears those same ravens in a different light. A man who once pushed a boy from a tower to keep a secret now finds the world filling with secrets that make all his past crimes feel small, almost petty. He walks through Winterfell's rebuilt halls as a guest and a reminder both. The Kingslayer kept on a short, polite leash. The southern games no longer tempt him. They taste of ash. When word comes of a ranging lost utterly, of horses returning riderless with frozen, shattered tack, he volunteers to ride north, not for glory, not to polish a name he knows will never shine clean, simply to stand, for once, where the true line is drawn. What if the north, half free and half humbled, hesitates too long before standing with him? What if the others slip through in the pause between one fearful council and the next, indifferent to treaties, uncaring that a woman once chose not to free a golden knight in a riverside castle? The dead do not care about that quiet night in Riverrun, but the living world they march into has been bent, ever so slightly by it. And in the thin, cold space between bent and broken, something is already moving toward the wall. So we go back, because all of this begins in a smaller room than the ones we have been walking through. Not a hall of banners or a throne beneath carved lions, a chamber in Riverrun, stone sweating a little with river damp, a single candle throwing a restless light against the walls. Catelyn sits where she sat before, only now her hand rests on a key she never lifts. Jaime Lannister is 3 doors and 2 guards away, iron between him and the world, and the air is thick with the way important words do not quite cross her lips. She does not speak the promise she once made to herself about her daughters. She does not unmake her son's war with one act of forbidden mercy. From that stillness, a line runs outward. It threads through Jaime's prolonged captivity, through the way Tywin must fight a war while his heir rusts in a northern cell. The Red Wedding does not vanish. It shifts. Walder Frey broods longer, Robb's broken vow festering in his pride, while Tywin weighs the cost of slaughter against the leverage of a living son. The knives at the twins come out later or in a different room, because the hostage in Riverrun changes every calculation. Another line runs south, to Sansa. Her return to the north, when it comes, is not bought by a lone woman's midnight bargain, but by a parchment peace, brittle and compromised. She walks out of King's Landing, not as the secret prize of a Kingslayer's journey, but as a term in a treaty that leaves the north nominally free and quietly bound. Every step she takes toward Winterfell carries the quiet understanding that her safety has been purchased with concessions she did not choose. Arya's path bends in the opposite direction. No tales of a lion in chains. No towering woman with a blue sword sworn to her mother's cause. Her wandering becomes a harsher refusal, not only of Lannister cruelty, but of Stark decisions that seem always to arrive too late, or not at all. If Sansa is drawn back into rooms of careful words, Arya walks further into the wild places beyond them, a living question mark trailing the family she no longer quite believes in. At the centre of these altered orbits sits Catelyn, her arc no less tragic for its restraint. She is the embodiment of the pull between a mother's desperate love and a lady's duty, and in this telling, she chooses the latter with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He does not drop it. He sets it down and watches it crack anyway. The The casualties of her obedience are quieter than a prison break, but they are casualties all the same. Is this world better? Worse? The ledger refuses to balance so neatly. Robb's war lasts longer, the North survives in a different shape, Jaime's soul-searching is delayed, Sansa's agency narrowed, Arya's defiance sharpened. The realm is not saved by one less reckless mercy. It is simply broken along different lines, its hopes and horrors rearranged in the shadow of a key that never turned. And here perhaps the pattern interrupts us. What if the most important choices are the ones we never quite make? The apology left unwritten. The journey postponed until it withers. The risk we rehearse in a quiet room and then set aside. The way a man steps back from a door he almost opened. When we look at Catelyn in that candlelight, fingers resting on cool metal, we are not only looking at a lady of the trident, we are looking at ourselves, at all the moments when stillness became its own decision and the world beyond the door bent, almost imperceptibly, around what did not happen. And winter, as ever, keeps moving toward all those doors, whether we open them or not. What if the measure of that unopened door is not taken in corpses at all, but in the quiet arithmetic of who must live with what they have preserved, and what they have allowed to slip into shadow? For the Lannisters, the reckoning is not as simple as banners still flying over King's Landing. Without the Red Wedding, they are spared the infamy that seeps like poison into song and story, spared the particular stain of slaughtering guests beneath a host's roof. They rule a realm that looks, on its surface, more orderly. The trident still bleeds, but it does not howl. Yet Jaime remains a Stark captive, a living reminder that their grip has limits, that winter in the north has not been broken, only held at bay. Tywin's victory feels less like a crushing of rebellion and more like a negotiated stalemate, with knives still half drawn at the edges. The Starks, by contrast, keep more names at the high table. Robb lives, Catelyn lives. Sansa and Arya are not scattered quite so far into darkness. There is no single song of betrayal to define them, no one night where everything is taken. But the cost of that survival is subtler, and in some ways, sharper. Robb bends the knee in some form, or at least accepts a peace that leaves the North bound again to a southern crown that killed his father. The way a man swallows that kind of word leaves a mark on his throat. Independence becomes a hope deferred, a story told in the hall rather than a banner carried in the snow. For the small folk, there are fewer spectacles. No crossbow bolts loosed into a wedding feast. No wolf king butchered to break their hearts in a single evening. Instead, they inherit years of low, grinding hunger, of burned fields never quite replanted, of roads where gold cloaks and broken men both take what they can. There is no clear rallying cry like the North remembering, only a slow, tired understanding that peace has been purchased somewhere far above them, and that its terms do not quite reach their doors. On the level of single lives, the differences deepen. Jaime's transformation comes in chains, not on the road with a blue-eyed knight. He does not leap into a bear pit. He sits in a river-run cell and is forced slowly to look at the man he has been. Sansa's lessons in power are more patient, more rooted in council chambers and careful words than in the open cruelty of Joffrey's court. Arya, kept further from home, by a war that never quite ends or quite explodes, drifts into a colder alienation. Her list lengthening without the terrible clarity of a single night to fix it. And Catelyn, most of all, must live. She speaks of duty in rooms where her own choice at River Run is never fully named, bearing that silence with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. She does not have the dark mercy of an abrupt death, or the monstrous rebirth of stone and river water. Her punishment is understanding. She walks through each winter day knowing that the war ended not with justice for Ned, but with a compromise written in other people's blood. Who wins then? In this quieter ruin? Perhaps in Westeros, winning is nothing more than surviving long enough to feel the full weight of the choices you made, and the doors you left closed pressing on your chest whenever the room goes still. The hurt of this what-if lies in its scale. Not in the fall of a house or a king's head rolling in the dust, but in a woman sitting in a dark stone room and keeping her hands folded in her lap. No keys taken, no chains loosed. The war moves on above her, and the most important thing she does is nothing at all. So many other imaginings reach for spectacle. What if Ned Stark lives? What if the Red Wedding fails? If crossbows misfire and wolves tear through the Frey hall? Here, the hinge is smaller. A single night at Riverrun. A mother who does not rise from her bed, who does not walk to the dungeon, who does not speak the words that send a Lannister south. What if the single decision that seems so small becomes the hinge upon which everything else turns? There is a particular cruelty in that quiet, because Catelyn's almost decision touches something people do not like to name. The way a man or a woman can ruin or redeem a life not only by rashness, but by restraint. She tries to be good, to be dutiful, to honour Robb's command and the Northern Lord's anger. And in doing so, she leaves Sansa and Arya where they are a little longer, held in a city that feeds on hostages. Who has not feared that in trying to be responsible, they might be leaving someone they love in the path of a slower, colder kind of danger? In this timeline, an entire constellation of meetings never lights. Brienne of Tarth remains in Renly's shadow or drifts into some other lord's service. She never hears Jaime Lannister confess beside a steaming bath, never learns the cost behind the word Kingslayer. Lady Stoneheart never rises from the river's darkness, so Arya never hears whispers of a mother who avenged her own death with a noose and a burned lantern's fire. Sansa never opens a door in the Vale or at an inn and finds a blue-clad knight who looks at her with puzzled, searching loyalty. The way important words fail to be spoken here is its own quiet tragedy. This is the sadness of paths never walked, no oath on a sword in the rain. No broken man on a weirwood stump trying to be better than his father's shadow. Jaime rots behind northern bars instead, his arc arrested in iron, while Catelyn's soul is never shattered and remade into something vengeful and strange. Is that mercy, or simply a different configuration of loss? Because that is what this world keeps teaching. There are no clean choices in a broken realm, only different arrangements of grief and grace. Free Jaime, and you loose a chain of events that ends in a wedding hall painted red. Keep him, and other cruelties find their way to the same tables by other roads. He does not know it, but even Tywin's victories depend on which doors a grieving woman walks through at midnight. Imagine her years later in this quieter ruin. The war is over, the banners are folded, winter has come and settled like a weight over the north. Catelyn stands by a narrow window in a rebuilt hall, older now, her hands resting on the stone with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. In the stillness, when the fire has burned low and the room is nothing but shadow and breath, she lets herself ask the question she never speaks aloud. If she had turned that key, would the world beyond her window be kinder, or only soaked in a different blood? And somewhere, far from that window, another choice is being prepared, just as small, just as dangerous. In another room, another winter, the key does turn. It is Catelyn's hand that moves, the iron cold against her palm, the choice made in a rush of fear and mother's fire. She goes to Jaime's cell in Riverrun and speaks the word oath with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, though she is no man, and nothing in her life has felt fragile for a long time. She frees him. She trusts one last bargain in a world already fraying. Brienne kneels. Steel touches stone. In the torchlight, she swears to guard Jaime, to carry him to King's Landing, to bring back Sansa and Arya. The way important words hang in that dark room changes everything that follows. The ambush on the road, the rough hands, the sword on the stump. Jaime's scream as his sword hand falls away into the mud like any other spoiled thing. He does not die. Does not. Instead, he begins that slow, painful walk toward understanding. Toward the man who will sit in a bath and speak of wildfire and broken vows. The man whose hand on a sword becomes more dangerous in memory than it ever was in battle. And while he is walking south, another horror is being arranged. Robb breaks his Frey betrothal. Walder Frey counts insults the way a man counts coins. Tywin listens to reports of a war dragging on and sees, in the shadows of his solar, a cheaper victory. The Red Wedding is not a treaty, but a slaughter, music and meat and crossbow bolts. Catelyn's last sound a raw, wordless thing. The cost is paid in a single night so brutal that even in memory the candles seem to gutter. From that wound, another figure rises. Lady Stoneheart does not speak of mercy. She speaks of rope and ravens and red hands. A mother's love turned to winter-hard vengeance. Brienne's path bends toward her, oath after oath, tangling in the dark, until even honour feels like a noose. Sansa, in this canon, does not bargain her way home. She is smuggled out, a frightened girl in a torn gown, led by a man who loves her name more than her. Arya wanders, always almost arriving, always turned aside at the last gate. The Stark children scatter like sparks from a fire no one can put out. Hold that world beside the one we have been walking through. The Red Wedding's brutal certainty against a cold, negotiated peace. Jaime's maimed hand reaching for a sword hilt against his whole body pressed quietly to a cell wall. Sansa's desperate flight against her careful, negotiated return. Which feels truer? Which feels kinder? Something in Jon's chest moves, in either telling, when he thinks of doors that did open and doors that stayed shut. Part of what makes the canon so haunting is precisely these sharp ruptures, the moments when the key turns and there is no taking it back, when betrayal steps out of the realm of what if and into the room. Pattern interrupt then. What if stories like this are not about fixing the past at all? What if they are about seeing the present more clearly, about tracing the shadow of every choice we live with now? As we step toward our final thoughts, hold both timelines in your mind for a moment. Feel their weight and notice where your own understanding has shifted, however slightly. If both timelines can exist in your mind at once, a question begins to form in the quiet between them. What if the bravest thing Catelyn ever did was, in this version, the thing she did not do? In canon, she unlocks Jaime's chains with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, knowing it might still shatter. Here, she keeps the key. She does not move. The dungeon stays dark, the Kingslayer remains a hostage, and on the surface it feels like the safer path, the proper northern obedience to command and custom. Yet as the war grinds on, the cost of that restraint spreads outward in slow, cold rings. The way a man might watch cracks spider through river ice and only later understand they began beneath his feet. That is the central insight this altered winter keeps pressing on us. The line between courage and recklessness, between duty and love, is often only visible in hindsight. Catelyn's non-decision becomes a kind of shadow over every room in Riverrun. Robb's counsel trusts her more, perhaps, but Sansa's cage in King's Landing is no lighter for it. Arya's road no less lonely. What seemed like loyalty to her son is also, unavoidably, a choice to let two daughters remain in the lion's jaws. Look at how the others bend around that single withheld act. Jaime never rides south to be stripped bare beside a campfire, never walks the long road toward understanding the weight of his own name. He speaks of honour less and thinks of it less, because no one like Brienne stands before him as a living rebuke. Sansa, without the distant rumour of a Lannister captive to bargain for her, learns that sometimes no rescue is coming, that survival is built from quiet compromises and carefully chosen words. Arya's path, already written in blood, becomes sharper still when no unlikely oaths are sworn in her defence. In that sense, every arc in this colder story circles the same question. Who are we when our lives are not punctuated by grand gestures, but by the small bargains we make with fear, with love, with winter itself? What if the most important turn in a life is not a charge across a battlefield, but the night you almost spoke and stayed silent instead? Our own world rarely gives us red wedding moments, cleanly marked in red and black as obviously right or wrong. More often, we live here in this grey space where every option hurts someone, where doing nothing is also a choice and carries its own quieter body count. The way important words catch in a throat, the way a man delays a hard conversation until after the next harvest, the next promotion, the next calm evening. These are our unturned keys. There is an invitation hiding in that thought. To look gently at the conversations you have not had, the risks you have not taken, the acts of mercy you have set aside because they seem too dangerous, or too foolish, or simply ill-timed. Something in Jon's chest moves when he imagines such moments in his own life. He does not call it regret, not yet, but he knows the shape. Stories like this are not a lecture. They are a fire we sit around together, watching how one choice throws different shadows on the walls. In a moment we will turn toward the final shape of this altered war, and what it asks of us. Before we do, hold that image of the key in Catelyn's hand, heavy and unused, and wonder quietly which doors in your life remain closed for the same reason. So we return quietly to that first room. A dark river-run chamber, a key on the table where Catelyn left it, untouched. From that stillness, we have walked a long road, past a war in the Riverlands that ground on without the sudden absence of Jaime Lannister, past a Robb Stark who kept his honour and his mother both, past lords who measured every word they spoke against the weight of a captive Kingslayer in their cells. We have watched a North that did not bleed out at a wedding, but bent its knee under parchment and seal instead. Along the way, the lives around that choice shifted. Sansa learned different courtesies in King's Landing, bargaining with a father who still feared for his son in chains. Arya's path moved in smaller shadows, less useful as a hostage when another Stark already sat behind iron bars. Jaime himself came home later, or not at all. His arc turned inward in a long winter of stone and straw, instead of on the road beside a blue-eyed knight. He does not leap into a bear pit here. He does not offer oaths to a woman who will hold them like a lantern in the dark. What remains the same is the cost. That is the quiet tension running beneath every scene we have traced. There was no version of this story in which everyone was saved. There was only a different arrangement of who paid. In canon, the Red Wedding is a fire that burns bright and terrible, its horror so sharp it almost feels clarifying. In this treaty-bound timeline, the deaths are slower, the betrayals more veiled, the understanding harder to name. The way important words disappear into legal language can be its own kind of violence. So, in your own heart, which room do you stand in? Do you choose the brutal clarity of a world where the doors at the Twins swing open to music and murder, and the war ends in a single night of red? Or do you find yourself drawn to this other path where Robb lives to sign away crowns, where Walder Frey swallows his rage for gold, where the North survives under a shadow of compromise that never quite lifts? If you are willing, step closer to the fire with me and speak of more than better or worse. Who gains the most in this arrangement, as you see it, and who is quietly broken by it? Which small, alternate moments do you imagine? A different conversation between Catelyn and Robb, a single letter Sansa sends or never sends, a Jaime who returns to King's Landing so late that even Tywin's patience has turned to ash. Do you see Catelyn's choice reflected in other stories you love, or in the way a man in your own life once set his hand on a door and then let it fall? Stories like this are an invitation as much as an answer. In the comments, lay your version of this timeline down with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Let others turn it in their hands, see where their own understanding catches the light. And then, when the talking is done, return for a moment to that key in Riverrun, lying in darkness while the river moves beyond the walls. Every tale we carry is built on doors that opened, and on countless more that never did. Somewhere, just out of sight, another hand is hovering over another key, and winter has not yet chosen which way it will turn.